Chapter 373. Li Guanwen's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. Your Majesty's thoughts couldn't be guessed randomly. However, Li Guanwen had been by Li Qitian's side all the time. He had some understanding of Li Qitian's thoughts and decisions. Li Guanwen knew that Li Qitian was on guard against Pang Xiao. He also knew that finding Madame Pang and sending her to Pang Xiao was not necessarily out of good intentions. He had no right to comment on this matter. However, he knew that Your Majesty wouldn't want Madame Pang to be driven out of the Wang mansion. Even if she was to be driven out, it couldn't be when he was present. Otherwise, Your Majesty would be in a bad mood. What if she took her anger out on him? Li Guanwen said with a smile. This servant understands Wang Ye's filial piety. Presumably, Madame Pang can also understand your feelings. However, even if you understand, the people outside may not understand. If someone slandered Wang Ye's good intentions as not serving his official mother, what should we do? Madame Pang heard this and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She said in agreement, Wang Yi, if you are angry, you can be angry. However, you can't ignore the Pang family's reputation. In any case, I am your official mother. Don't tell me you don't want to serve your official mother. If these words were to spread, wouldn't others slander our Pang family? Li Guanwen had already felt that Pang Xiao seemed to be wavering after saying those words. However, who would have thought that Madame Pang would suddenly interrupt and say such unpleasant words? It wasn't like she was talking to a 3-year-old child. How could she threaten and reprimand her? With such words, which man with a bit of courage would yield? What's more, Pang Xiao wasn't even born in the Pang family. Her mother was even persecuted by Madame Pang. Pang Xiao didn't kill Madame Pang. Instead, she followed the imperial edict and brought her back to support her. This was already very unexpected. Sure enough, Pang Xiao's face turned even uglier. He ignored Madame Hua and pretended not to hear her. He turned to Li Guanwen and said, Thank you for your kind intentions, Chief Stewardly. However, this king is sincere and wholeheartedly wants the best for Madame Feng, so he doesn't care what others say or think. As long as Madame Feng could have a good life, it would be fine. This king is worried that Madame Pang will be angered to death if things go on like this. After saying that, Pang Xiao shot a cold glance at Madame Pang. Madame Pang felt as if her heart had been stabbed a few times with an awl. She could even feel the coldness in Pang Xiao's eyes, which were like that of a ferocious beast staring at its prey. She actually felt that if she didn't obediently walk out upright this time, Pang Xiao would have the ability to carry her out horizontally. Why didn't she realize that this person was actually a wolf cub a while ago? His filial piety and obedience to her even made her feel that it was not bad to raise a son like Pang Xiao. She didn't know much about Pang Xiao, and because she let down her guard, she changed from observing him from the beginning to the current situation. If she had known that this person's true nature was so difficult to get along with, she wouldn't have spoken like this. If she was really moved out of the mansion because of this, who knew how furious Your Majesty would be? How could she bear the consequences? Madame Pang frowned, and the creases between her eyebrows became deeper. Her fingers tightly grasped the sleeves of her gown, and her lips opened and closed, but she couldn't say anything softly because of her face. She felt that even if she softened her words, Pang Xiao wouldn't let her go, given his temperament. The result would be the same, so why should she make a pointless struggle? Li Guanwen looked on coldly and couldn't help but shake his head at this moment. He didn't know if Your Majesty had contacted Madame Pang in private. If Madame Pang was really someone arranged by Your Majesty, he could only say that Your Majesty didn't choose a good person this time. She couldn't see the opportunity, didn't know how to judge the situation, and didn't know how to be flexible. Madame Pang only knew how to be rude and unreasonable and put on the airs of a mistress. Not to mention that Pang Xiao saw this woman every day. Even he, who saw her for the first time, was disgusted with Madame Pang. At this time, Pang Xiao had ordered Huzi to prepare the horse. He turned back and said to Li Guanwen, I'll have to trouble eunuch Li to be a witness in front of Your Majesty. Otherwise, this king will speak unilaterally, and someone will slander him behind his back. Things had already come to this. Even if Li Guanwen resisted in his heart, what could he do? If he refused Pang Xiao face to face, he would be in an environment where he had to be on guard against Pang Xiao's revenge all the time in the future. Rather than that, it was better to make a good relationship. Prince Zhongshuan is really too polite. Although this servant is slow-witted, I can still distinguish between right and wrong. If your majesty asks, this servant will tell you the truth. In that case, I'll have to trouble eunuch Li. Pang Xiao politely walked out with Li Guanwen. Under the cover of the cloak, he slipped an exquisite brocade bag into Li Guanwen's sleeve. Li Guanwen was stunned. He first touched the bag. The things in the bag were not gold or silver. Looking at the shape of the grains, it should be a bag of gems. Li Guanwen knew that a person like Pang Xiao would not be stingy. He couldn't help but feel happy in his heart. He carefully put the bag of gems into his sleeve pocket. Madame Pang stood stiffly in the same place. Seeing Pang Xiao and Li Guanwen talking and laughing as they left the inner residence, she gritted her teeth and squeezed out a word from between her teeth. Ungrateful wretch. But no matter what Madame Pang thought in her heart, Pang Xiao still complained to Li Qitian. His arm was bandaged. When he saw Li Qitian, he knelt straight down with a thud. He first complained that Jiziyu had hurt him carelessly, shouting, I have never been injured like this on the battlefield. Li Qitian wanted to see this scene the most in his heart. But in front of Pang Xiao, Li Qitian only comforted him with a few words and did not say much. Pang Xiao sighed softly and changed the topic. He said that he wanted to move Madame Pang out of the mansion. Li Qitian was quite surprised. Wasn't it fine before? Why did you suddenly say this? Pang Xiao reported to Li Qitian what had happened in the mansion just now and asked Li Guanwen to be the witness. Li Guanwen did not dare to speak for Pang Xiao, but he also did not dare to do nothing. Therefore, when Li Qitian asked about the situation at that time, Li Guanwen cleverly told the truth and showed Pang Xiao's helplessness incisively and vividly. He restrained himself from expressing any emotion and did not affect Your Majesty's judgment. For a moment, the imperial study was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. After a long time, Li Qitian weighed the pros and cons and nodded in agreement. You should choose a good house. After all, she was officially married to General Ziyu. It is not good to neglect her. Yes, I will respect Your Majesty's teachings. Although I will live in another mansion, I will not treat Madame Pang unfairly. Well, that's good. Li Qitian comforted Pang Xiao again and asked him to leave. Chapter 374. When Li Guanwen heard Li Qitian's question, his heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly lowered his eyes to hide the emotions in his eyes. His mind was thinking quickly, and in a breath he said, Replying to Your Majesty, from what this servant saw, even if Prince Consort Ji was not as straightforward as Prince Zhongshuan, he was not far off. However, Prince Consort Ji's temperament has always been cold. The fact that he could say a few harsh words already proves that he was angry. When Li Qitian heard this, he thought for a moment and nodded. We understand. Are their injuries okay? Li Guanwen respectfully replied. Replying to Your Majesty, Imperial Physician Ma went to take a look. The bump on Prince Consort Ji's forehead is not small. It seems that Prince Consort Ji cherishes his face and probably doesn't want to go out for the next few days. Prince Zhongshuan's injuries are not serious. It's just that his arm was pierced by a sword. As for the other injuries, you saw just now. Prince Zhongshuan's mouth is still blue. These two aren't kids anymore. Li Qitian helplessly shook his head and sighed. How old are they? They actually fought. We feel ashamed for them. If the civil and military officials of the imperial court knew about this, they would laugh their heads off. Your Majesty is right. Li Guanwen looked down. He had a premonition that this matter was not far from being known by the civil and military officials of the imperial court. Li Qitian's mind was picturing the scene of Pang Xiao and Jiziyu fighting. The corners of his mouth twitched twice, as if he wanted to laugh, but for the sake of his face, he forced himself not to laugh. When Li Guanwen saw this, he hurriedly lowered his head even more. When Your Majesty was in such a good mood, he just needed to be an invisible person. This was to prevent Your Majesty from venting his anger on him when he was in a bad mood in the future. Li Qiqian thought for a moment before realizing that Li Guanwen had already retreated to the side. He was very satisfied and smiled as he ordered Imperial Physician Ma to ask more questions. Finally, he thoughtfully called out to Li Guanwen, "Tell the Imperial Institute of Medicine to check their pulse in 3 days, especially Prince Zhongxun. After all, the one who injured him was my brother-in-law." After pausing for a moment, he said, "I remember that there is a red coral ornament in the storehouse. Go and send it to the eldest princess's residence and say that I gave it to Anyang to play with." "Yes, this servant will go now." Percent Qin Yining was sitting in the carriage at this moment. He frowned and asked Xianyun, "What did she say? Didn't you say that it was just a fight? How did you get hurt?" Xianyun said, "This servant doesn't know the details. This servant only heard about it when I left the residence." Prince Consort Ji was so angry that he stabbed Wang Yi. Although he didn't take his life, his blood spilled all over the ground at that time. This person is really... Qin Yining frowned and twisted his fingers. When he heard that these two people fought, he only thought that it was Pang Zhao's trick. Who would have thought that later he was stabbed by Ji Ziyu? Xianyun saw that Qin Yining was so nervous about Pang Zhao and couldn't help but secretly laugh. "Miss, don't worry. When you see Wang Yi later, everything will be clear." Mississippi, outside the carriage, Xiao Shui whispered, "This servant has asked. Just now, Your Majesty's chief steward came to visit the prince's mansion. As a result, Wang Yi and Madame Pang quarreled in the inner residence. Wang Yi was so angry that he went to the palace to meet the emperor in person. He hasn't come back yet." Qin Yining's eyebrows twitched when he heard this. He said slowly, "I see. Let's wait in a hidden place and see what happens." Yes. The group drove the carriage to a hidden alley opposite the prince's mansion. Qin Yining and Xianyun stayed in the carriage. Jing Ziyu and the others were guarding around vigilantly. Qin Yining felt a little relieved now. He still had the strength to go to the palace to meet the emperor, which meant that his injury was not serious. However, it was hard to say with Pang Zhao's character. He was used to being tough. If he really wanted to stand out for something, he could endure the injury. However, why did Pang Zhao quarrel with Madame Pang and then go to the palace in a hurry? Qin Yining's fingers gently tapped on the small table, making rhythmic, slow, and crisp sounds. Some clues in her mind were pieced together. She had more guesses. However, Qin Yining did not wait for long. There was movement in the prince's mansion. First, a person and a horse quickly returned to the prince's mansion. Jing Ziyu only had time to take a look. After confirming that the person who came back was Pang Zhao, he went back and forth to Qin Yining. After a while, the side door of the prince's mansion opened again. A gorgeous carriage came out from inside. Behind it were 6 lawn with carriages, followed by a group of servants. The procession came out of the side door in a mighty manner and stopped in front of the prince's mansion. Pang Zhao stood on the steps, wearing a cloak with a gray fur collar. He looked at the carriages calmly. There was a faint sobbing sound coming from the lawn with carriage. Someone even opened the curtain and called softly, "Wang Yi, don't let us go. We are the concubines that your majesty gave to Wang Yi. We won't go." Pang Zhao said expressionlessly, "Madame Pang is this king's official mother. Now, she has to live elsewhere to recuperate. If she goes alone, how can this king be at ease? This prince has yet to marry, so the only womenfolk I can trust are all of you. You will serve Madame Pang on behalf of this king. You must accompany her and be filial. If you show even the slightest bit of negligence, this prince will not let you off easily when he finds out. Wang Yi, we don't want to. It's okay if you don't want to accompany Madame Pang." Pang Zhao's words made the chattering women disappear. Then they heard Pang Zhao say in an even colder voice, "You are this king's concubines. Even if your majesty gave you this, don't forget your identity. Madame Pang is this king's official mother. This king respects and is filial. He asked you to serve this king, but you all refuse. What's the use of you in the Wang mansion? If you don't want to go, you can go back by yourself." His words made all the women's faces change. At the same time, the first luxurious carriage finally started to move. The curtain was lifted. Madame Pang leaned half of her body out with an angry face. She said angrily, "If you don't want them, you can kill them and sell them. Why do you want to give them to me? I don't want them. Tell those bitches to stay away from me. They are all ugly." The word bitch made the women in the back carriage angry. They all talked back. Pang Xiao listened to the chattering women. He was not annoyed. Instead, he laughed. "Madam Pang, are you confused? No matter how much these women seduce Qiao Qiao, they are not General Qi's concubines. Could it be that you are used to being jealous and can't control your temper now? You evil creature. Madam Pang, you should go to the other courtyard and recuperate. My concubines will serve you well." Pang Xiao ordered, "Let's go. Serve Madam Pang well." Suddenly, the carriage was filled with sorrow. Chapter 375. Pang Xiao stood in front of the door with his hands clasped behind his back. Watching the carriage slowly drive away, he couldn't help but chuckle. Even the pain in his arm didn't hurt as much. Today, he had used this as an excuse to clean up the eyesores in the manor. If these people left the manor today, it would take a lot of effort for them to come back. In any case, these people were already part of the manor. Whether they were allowed to enter or not depended on whether he nodded or not. In this way, when Sister E entered the manor in the future, it would be less troublesome. He wasn't worried that Sister E couldn't deal with someone as sharp and unkind as Madame Fong. But why should he stay and make trouble for Sister E when he could get rid of this obstacle with a plan? Pang Xiao turned around happily. Just as he was about to return to the manor, he saw Huzi winking at him. "What's wrong?" Huzi quietly pointed at the alley across the street. Pang Xiao glanced at him from the corner of his eyes without batting an eyelid. He saw an unfamiliar manservant standing at the corner of the wall. That person's face was ordinary and unremarkable. Although outsiders might not be able to tell, experts could tell that this person must be a person with superb martial arts skills. Moreover, he had been staring at the entrance of the prince's mansion. When he met their eyes, he did not avoid them. Instead, he calmly nodded his head. Pang Xiao had a flash of inspiration. He seemed to have sensed something. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and expressionlessly turned to return to the manor. After returning to the study, he closed the door and said in a low voice, "Do you think Sister E is here?" "It must be 4th Mississippi," Huzi said with a smile. 4th Miss is so concerned about you. Now the news that you fought with Prince Consort G and were seriously injured has spread. How can 4th Miss not be worried? She must come and see with her own eyes to be at ease. Pang Xiao smiled and nodded with a straight face. He calmly paced around and said regretfully, "It's a pity that there are still spies in the manor. Otherwise, I can bring her in to see grandfather and grandmother. These days when she wasn't here, grandmother was always talking about her. There will be plenty of time in the future. Wang Yi, it's more important for you to meet the 4th Miss now, so that she can rest assured." Pang Xiao nodded, changed his clothes, and changed the blood-soaked bandage on his arm. Then, he quietly sneaked out of the back door, where there was no one. He ordered Huzi to follow him from a distance so that he wouldn't miss anything. Soon, he circled around and arrived at Qin Yining's carriage. Jing Zhe, young man, Xiao Shui, and a Han guarded the sides of the carriage and the 2 sides of the alley. When they saw someone approaching, they became alert. But when they saw who it was, they relaxed. Next to the carriage, young man whispered, "Miss, Wang Yi is here." Qin Yining, who was in the carriage, was stunned. He hurriedly lifted the curtain. Pang Xiao was already standing by the car window with a smile on his face. When Xianyan saw Pang Xiao, she winked at Qin Yining and got out of the carriage. She smiled and bowed to Pang Xiao. Then, she asked several spies to leave. Qin Yining's cheeks turned red. When she saw Pang Xiao nimbly jump into the carriage, she couldn't help smiling happily. Pang Xiao sat down beside her and put down the curtain. He touched her cheek with his uninjured right hand. "Why are you here? I heard that you were stabbed by Prince Consort Ji, so I came to see. I didn't expect to see a good show." Pang Xiao laughed. "Those women in the manor are really annoying. They have seriously disturbed the lives of my grandfather, grandmother, and mother." Although Pang Xiao was worried that Qin Yining would be wronged when she married him, he was too embarrassed to say this in front of her. He didn't want Qin Yining to think that he was asking for credit. Seeing Pang Xiao's meaningful smile, Qin Yining also laughed. He put an arm around Pang Zhao's neck and said in a brotherly manner, "Beautiful brother, don't you have anything else to say?" This teasing tone made Pang Zhao laugh. His heart was tickled by her calling him beautiful brother. He put an arm around her waist and pressed her into his arms. "Nothing else. You can call me beautiful brother again." Qin Yining leaned over and laughed. "Beautiful brother is clearly using the excuse of being stabbed by your majesty's brother-in-law today to ask for compensation from your majesty. You took away one of your official mothers and conveniently sent your concubines away. There must be some spies among the servants who haven't been exposed, right? This kind of killing several birds with one arrow has always been the style of beautiful brother." She leaned close to his ear and whispered, "And I think the most important thing is to send your concubines away. Are you afraid that I will punish them in the future and feel sorry for them?" She called Pang Zhao beautiful brother again and again. Pang Zhao's bones melted as a warm current flowed through his body. The only thing left in his mind was her soft voice and the warm breath that fell on his ear. Pang Zhao was never a shy person. He simply turned over and pressed her against the carriage. He bit the little mouth that he had missed for a long time. Before Qin Yining could react, the world was spinning. She couldn't struggle, so she could only accept it obediently. Pang Zhao only propped himself up when she was almost out of breath. "How am I feeling sorry for them? I feel sorry for you." Qin Yining's beautiful eyes sparkled. She smiled softly and said, "I know." Pang Zhao couldn't help but kiss her eyelashes lightly. "I know you know. You are deliberately teasing me." Both of them laughed. Qin Yining pushed him, and the two of them sat up straight. Qin Yining asked, "Where did Ji Kuang hurt you? I see that the corner of your mouth is bruised. He hit you hard enough. If he didn't hit you hard enough, how could it be real?" Pang Zhao smiled and said, "The skin on my arm was pierced, but it's not a big deal. Alan has a sense of propriety. Did you guys make an agreement beforehand?" Qin Yining lifted Pang Zhao's sleeve. Pang Zhao cooperated and took off his outer robe, showing Qin Yining his injury. "How could we have made an agreement beforehand? I just went to his residence to sit for a while, drink tea, and chat. When I went out, I met the Anyang eldest princess. I thought that since it was rare for me to come across this kind of situation, I might as well take advantage of the opportunity. Alan and I are in the same situation, so he must have thought of this. We spoke a few words and guessed each other's intentions, so we fought. You guys didn't make an agreement beforehand. You actually have this kind of tacit understanding. It was from the battlefield in the past. Although our situation is very different from before, there's a chance that we will stand on opposite sides. But we still have a tacit understanding of each other." Qin Yining nodded in understanding and said with a sigh, "Being born in this world, there is nothing we can do about it. However, although Prince Consort G's strategy is not bad and he does not lack decisive methods, he is still a good brother." "That's right." Pang Zhao couldn't help but sigh. "Our situation is not the same as before. Although we will scheme against each other, we can understand each other. Sometimes, we have no other choice." Qin Yining nodded, thinking about it. This is the difference between men and women. If two good sisters wanted to scheme against each other to protect themselves, they would not be so open-minded and their relationship would have been broken long ago. But you men are not the same. It doesn't distinguish between men and women, it just depends on who it is. Jilan and I have a life and death friendship, and I have always admired his character and martial arts. He is a straightforward person, so I am willing to treat him honestly. Because our situations are similar, we know how difficult it is for each other." At this point, Pang Zhao couldn't help but laugh. The two of us are scheming against each other to protect ourselves, and we know that we are scheming against each other. So it is not a bad thing to have this kind of tacit understanding. Your wound is still bleeding. Qin Yining saw that the bandage on his strong arm was bleeding and said worriedly, "Don't move too much these few days. Don't come into contact with water, and you have to pay attention to your diet. Don't think that you are made of iron. Do you think you won't feel pain when you are injured? You're covered in scars all over, and you look so ugly." "Hey, you don't like it? And there is no other way. I'm already covered in scars. Why don't you go back and talk to Bing Tang and ask her to find a way to get rid of the scars?" Just say that it is uncomfortable to touch. How about it? If she said that, wouldn't she be laughed at by Bingtang? Qin Yining blushed and glared at him fiercely. You are so spoiled. With Qin Yining's help, Pang Xiao put on his clothes and asked her in a low voice, Did Miss Lu make things difficult for you? Qin Yining smiled and said, She didn't make things difficult. It is just that she made Madame Lu lose face last time. I don't know what she will do in the future. Chapter 376. Of course I know she won't let it go. It's all because someone's charm is too strong. Qin Yining crossed her arms and looked at Pang Xiao helplessly. I'm just sitting at home, and trouble comes from the sky. I didn't provoke anyone, but I have two enemies who are bent on scheming against me, and they are both of high status. Pang Xiao was amused by her and couldn't help laughing. He scratched the bridge of her nose and said, I'll take it that you are jealous. Qin Yining said seriously, I am jealous. Looking into her watery eyes, Pang Xiao's heart skipped a beat. He found that she was serious. I thought you. What did you think I was? Won't you be jealous? Qin Yining was very surprised. She didn't expect that Pang Xiao, such a smart person, would think that she was a person who wouldn't be jealous. Am I such a generous person in your mind? Pang Xiao shook his head and held her in his arms. He rubbed his chin on the top of her head and sighed. It's my negligence. Because you have always been so calm and resourceful, I often think that no matter what happens, you can see through it, but I forget that you were just a girl. It's my fault. He was really stupid. No matter how strong Qin Yining was, she was just a 16-year-old girl. And he was so careless that he ignored her feelings and took her sensibility and patience for granted. What was the difference between him and those who didn't care about Qin Yining and only cared about themselves? Sensing Pang Xiao's low mood, Qin Yining smiled and looked up. She took the initiative to kiss his chin. What's right and wrong? Although I am a girl, I have never been weaker than anyone else. You are a man, but you think so much. You're not as open-minded as me. Pang Xiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, I'm not open-minded enough. I just feel sorry for you. Qin Yining's warm breath brushed against his ear. He hurriedly turned away and pushed Qin Yining's shoulder, saying, Let's just talk for a while. Don't let others see and make wild guesses. Pang Xiao smiled and said, I know. I'll go and see you secretly in the future. However, now that you have a few more experts by your side, it won't be easy to sneak through your window. When the guards find out, won't they overthink it? Qin Yining blushed at her teasing and snorted softly. That was arranged by my father to guard against you. Is father-in-law still holding a grudge over what happened last time? Pang Xiao joked. Qin Yining glared at him. When he thought about how Qin Yining purposely let Qin Huayuan see his shadow, he got angry. He pushed Qin Yining's shoulder and said, Go. Go back and recuperate. Pang Xiao didn't tease her anymore. He pulled her soft, white hand and kissed it, then jumped down from the carriage. When Xian Yun saw Ming Xiao come out, she approached him and bowed. Pang Xiao said, Take good care of your daughter. Yes, this servant will do my best. Pang Xiao nodded and quickly walked in the opposite direction of the prince's residence. Qin Yining lifted the curtain with her white hand. Seeing that he was far away, she ordered them to go back. Qin Yining felt relieved. He even saw a good show. Most importantly, he met and chatted with Pang Xiao for a while. He was in a good mood and couldn't help but smile the whole way back. Xian Yin knew that her mistress was thin-skinned, so she didn't say much. However, she couldn't help but smile the whole way. Percent recently, the capital was very lively. First, there was the news that Madame Lu was scolded by her brother in public because of Minister Qin's daughter. Then, there were people who gossiped about the relationship between Prince Consort Ji, Prince Zhongshuan, and Princess Royal of Anyang 3 times a day. When the news of the battle between the Tiger Army and the Dragon Stallion Army spread, the whole thing reached a boiling point. Almost everyone knew about it. Everyone didn't have much entertainment on a normal day. During the cold winter, they didn't like to walk outside. Now that the weather was warmer, they walked outside more often and heard more news. Qin Yining saw that the public opinion was developing in the direction that Li Qitian wanted. He knew that Pang Xiao was behind this. The more time he spent with him, the more Qin Yining realized that Pang Xiao was actually a meticulous and cunning person. At least, he wasn't as rough as he looked on the surface. As long as Pang Xiao was willing to use his brain, she could be at ease. However, seeing that the battle between the two war gods had suppressed Madame Lu's matter, Qin Yining didn't see Madame Lu's counterattack for a few days. He thought that the matter had already passed. Who would have thought that Lu Dahan would suddenly rush over to see her? Benefactor, people from the Marquis of Zhongyong's manor came to find me today. They said that they wanted to buy your residence at a high price. If I wasn't willing to sell, they would kill me. Qin Yining said in surprise. Madame Lu of the Marquis of Zhongyong's manor sent people to find you. Yes, Lu Dahan said, I, old Lu, am not afraid of death. However, I'm afraid of doing something wrong and implicating Benefactor. A few days ago, didn't people say that Benefactor and that woman from the Marquis of Zhongyong's manor didn't get along? Perhaps she purposely came to find trouble with you. Qin Yining furrowed his brows in deep thought. Currently, the residence they were living in was in the process of being handed over between the two families. She had previously placed the residence under Lu Dahan's name and had him handed over to Qin Huaiyuan. He didn't need to pay any money and only needed to transfer the ownership. Who would have thought that after suffering so many times, Madame Lu still wouldn't give up and wanted to continue opposing her? Benefactor, what do you think we should do now? Qin Yining said, You don't need to be afraid. She won't do anything to you. Even if she's serious, I'm not afraid. However, are we going to continue to be in a deadlock with Madame Lu? She wants to buy it. If I don't sell it, even if she doesn't kill me in front of me, she won't let us have an easy time. Why don't we just sell the residence to her at a high price? This way, we'll have money and buy a better one. Let her suffer this loss. Qin Yining heard this and shook his head in amusement. Lu Dahan was a one-track-minded person. If they bought another residence, wouldn't Madame Lu accept the money again? The Lu family was a century-old family with a deep foundation. Perhaps to Madame Lu, money was just a number. Wouldn't it be easy for her to buy a residence at a high price? Moreover, if she took the opportunity to ask Madame Lu for money, she would have to lower her head. Qin Yining had never been a person who lowered her head easily. She would rather be enemies with the Lu family than do anything that would harm the family Qin's reputation. If the harem didn't do things openly, wouldn't her father become a laughingstock in the imperial court? Young lady. At this moment, Qiu Lu came to the door and bowed. Young lady, the Lu family sent a letter saying that the three masters aren't at home and there's no one in charge. Madame Lu instructed us to pass the letter to you. Let me take a look. Qiu Lu handed the gilded letter to Qin Yining. Qin Yining couldn't help but be astonished after reading it carefully. The letter was sent by Lu Hong and invited Qin Huaiyuan out for a chat. Chapter 377. When Lu Dahan saw Qin Yining's confident expression, he couldn't help but ask curiously, Boss, do you have a way to deal with Madame Lu? Qin Yining smiled and nodded. Yes, I'll have to discuss this matter with my father later. But you don't have to be afraid. Just focus on living your life peacefully. Madame Lu wants to deal with me, so she'll only think of ways to deal with me. As for you, she's just trying to scare you. She wants you to sell the house to her and embarrass my family Qin. Alas, Lu Dahan sighed and said, Boss, you rich people live such a tiring life. Lu Dahan was a straightforward person. He said whatever was on his mind, and Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. After seeing Lu Dahan off, Qin Yining ordered Qiu Lu, Go to the front yard and wait for my father. When he comes back, come and tell me immediately. Tell my father that I have something to discuss with him. Qiu Lu nodded heavily and hurried out. After Qin Huaiyuan returned home, Qin Yining hurried over and told him what happened today. In the end, he said worriedly, Father, this second master of the Lu family isn't easy to get along with. It seems like he wants to make friends with you, but in fact, he's trying to sow discord. How should we deal with him? Li Qiqian asked the Dian officials to come here in order to balance the influence of the aristocratic families, the old officials of Beiji, and the nobles. No matter which side the Dian officials favored, Li Qiqian would be greatly displeased. However, once Lu Hong sent the invitation, regardless of whether Qin Huaiyuan would show up or not, it would be misunderstood by Li Qitian that Qin Huaiyuan was close to the Lu family. If Lu Hong had a little consideration for his family Qin, he wouldn't have sent the invitation so brazenly. Qin Huaiyuan slowly picked up the teacup and took a sip. He asked calmly, "What do you think we should do?" Qin Yining smiled and said, "Isn't your daughter asking you for advice? Why are you asking me?" Qin Huaiyuan pretended to be angry and glanced at Qin Yining, saying, "Are you still pretending in front of your father? Didn't you already have a plan? Tell me about it. Let me see if we have the same idea." After hearing Qin Huaiyuan's words, Qin Yining smiled and said, "It's actually very simple. He did this because he wanted to sow discord between you and your majesty. If you don't attend the banquet, it means that you look down on the Lu family. But if you go, your majesty will definitely be displeased with you. So, I thought a way to beat them at their own game." Qin Huaiyuan's eyes lit up when he heard this. He put down the teacup and looked at Qin Yining with a smile. Qin Yining said, "Didn't Madame Lu say that if Lu Dehan didn't sell the residence to her, she would kill him? She's a lady from a respectable family. How could she act so arrogantly? I should teach her a lesson so that she won't always come out and prance around and annoy me." "So, you want to use this matter to deal with Madame Lu as well?" "Yes." Qin Yining nodded firmly. She moved closer to Qin Huaiyuan and whispered a few words. When Qin Huaiyuan heard this, he couldn't help but pinch Qin Yining's cheek. "Little girl, how did you think of this? We actually have the same idea." Qin Yining giggled and said, "Because I'm father's daughter, we naturally have the same idea. Father, what do you think of my idea?" "Of course it's good that you have the same idea as me." Qin Huaiyuan made a rare joke. "Don't worry, I'll personally reply to Lu Hong in a moment. Just say that I've set the meeting place on the 3rd floor of the Drunken Immortal restaurant and ask him to meet tomorrow." "Good. Father's actions are well-mannered and won't offend the Lu family. Leave the rest to your daughter to plan." Qin Huaiyuan nodded in relief. Qin Yining ordered people to book the entire 2nd floor of the Drunken Immortal restaurant tomorrow. Then he called Jingzhe and the other 3 over and whispered a few words to them. The 4 of them respectfully nodded in agreement. After they finished assigning tasks, it was soon the afternoon of the next day. Qin Yining sat by the window of a private room on the 2nd floor and watched as Qin Huaiyuan waited on the 1st floor. About half an hour before the appointed time, a luxurious carriage slowly came to a stop in front of the Drunken Immortal restaurant. Several servants stepped forward and lifted the carriage's curtains. Everything was done in an orderly manner, as if they were from a wealthy family. A young master wearing a sky-blue cloak with a white fur collar alighted from the carriage. It was Lu Hong. Qin Huaiyuan stood downstairs of the Drunken Immortal restaurant. When Lu Hong saw him, he hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. "This must be Lord Qin. This junior is Lu Hong. Greetings to Lord Qin. Second Master Lu, please dispense with the formalities. This junior originally wanted to show my respect to Lord Qin today. Who knew that Lord Qin would spend so much money to book a banquet? This junior is truly ashamed." Lu Hong cupped his hands. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, "This old man has long wanted to pay a visit to your residence, but I didn't have the time. Today's gathering at the Drunken Immortal restaurant is just right. This old man has already booked the entire 3rd floor. Young Master Lu, please follow this old man." "Yes, Lord Qin is truly considerate." Qin Huaiyuan and Lu Hong exchanged pleasantries as they passed through the main hall and ascended the stairs. When they reached the 2nd floor, Lu Hong subconsciously glanced in the direction of the private room. Seeing that there were servants and manservants at the door, he knew that the 2nd floor should be open as usual. Lu Hong didn't think too much about it and followed Qin Huaiyuan to the 3rd floor. Qin Huaiyuan was calm, experienced, and knowledgeable. Moreover, his speech was gentle and calm. As long as he wanted to, he could get along well with anyone. Lu Hong, on the other hand, was experienced and knowledgeable. His temperament was refined and noble, and his every movement exuded a natural air of nobility. In addition, his speech was extraordinary and meaningful. If one didn't talk about their standpoints, Lu Heng and Qin Huaiyuan really chatted happily. At this time, Madame Lu received a piece of news. What did you say? That bastard actually dared to look down on me. He even dared to go to the drunken immortal restaurant with that family Qin girl to sign the transfer papers. Yes, that Lu Dahan is a ghoul. He said that he made an agreement with the family Qin, so it's a done deal. No matter how much money we give, Lu Dahan will still sell the house to the family Qin. Our people all saw the family Qin girl go to the drunken immortal restaurant to meet Lu Dahan. Madame Lu was so angry that her whole body trembled. Bah, this kind of lowly body actually has the surname Lu? He doesn't deserve it. Come. Madame Lu's voice was extremely sharp. The servants and gigolos outside responded. Madame Lu said, bring all the bodyguards and martial artists in the house. Call all the manservants. Grab your weapons and follow me to the drunken immortal restaurant. Percent at this time. Qin Yining was bored to death. He was sitting on the seat by the window, drinking tea and pondering. He thought that if they didn't talk about serious matters now, his father and Lu Heng should be able to chat happily. He didn't know if the big fish over there had taken a bait. Chapter 378. Qin Yining's lips curled into a meaningful smile as he turned around to look at Jing Zhe. Jing Zhe immediately understood and led the other 3 spies to guard the staircase on the 2nd floor. Qin Yining continued to look downstairs and saw Mrs. Lu, who was dressed in a luxurious purple dress, getting off the carriage with the help of her maidservants. With a gloomy face, she led 20 to 30 men into Zuaxian restaurant. The shopkeeper and the waiter were frightened and hurried out to inquire about the situation. However, they were pushed away by Mrs. Lu's guards. Don't get in the way. Do you think you can afford to interfere with what our Lu family wants to do? Mrs. Lu's voice was filled with rage. Her eyebrows were raised and her eyes were fierce, as if she would order her men to kill anyone who stood in her way. When the shopkeeper heard that she was from the Lu family, he did not dare to stop her. Mrs. Lu saw that the shopkeeper was afraid and said, Is there anyone with the surname Qin here today? Is he upstairs? In anger, Mrs. Lu did not wait for the shopkeeper to answer and ordered her men, Go upstairs. If you see anyone who is selling a house with the family Qin, beat them to death on the spot. You will be rewarded handsomely if you kill them. Don't be afraid. If anything happens, the Lu family will take responsibility. Yes. The servants' roars were deafening. Each of them carried their sticks and walked up the stairs aggressively, causing the wooden stairs to creak as they stepped on them. The diners on the 1st floor had already retreated to the side. They whispered to each other and craned their necks to look upstairs. There were also some people who thought that they could not afford to offend the Lu family and hurriedly paid the bill and left this place. Mrs. Lu pursed her lips and sneered. If the tiger did not show its power, the family Qin would treat her as a sick cat. That Lu Dahan did not know what was good for him. Did the family Qin not know what was good for him either? No, that damned family Qin girl did not know what was good for her. Today, she was going to make her understand just who had the final say in the capital. Who are you people? At this moment, Jing Zhe, young man, Xiao Shui, and a Han blocked the staircase. The thugs of the Lu family who rushed up were all aggressive. They looked at the 4 ordinary servants who were blocking the way and didn't take them seriously at all. They pushed them aside and said, Don't meddle. Someone turned around and asked Madame Lu, Madam, which floor are we going to? Mrs. Lu looked at the shopkeeper coldly and said, The family Qin has an appointment with someone. Which floor is it? The shopkeeper thought for a moment. The 2nd floor was reserved by a lady, and the 3rd floor was occupied by a family Qin. He really didn't want to answer because he was afraid of offending the family Qin. However, the Drunken Immortal restaurant was only so big. Even if he didn't say anything, the Lu family would be able to find someone very quickly. Moreover, he would offend such a big family. Thinking of this, the shopkeeper decided that a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. He said slowly, Yes, it's on the 3rd floor. Mrs. Lu received a response and said, She's on the 3rd floor. Go up and give that Qin Wanru a good beating when you catch her. Yes. The thugs pushed aside Jingzhe and the others who didn't stop them at all and went up the stairs from the second floor to the third floor without any hindrance. Mrs. Liu was also the last to go up to the second floor. At this moment, a magnetic and gentle male voice suddenly came from the third floor. Second Master Liu, what's the meaning of this? Are these the thugs of the Liu family deliberately making things difficult for me? Second Master Liu? Mrs. Liu stood there in shock. Her expression was uncertain and her mind was in a mess. The thugs rushed up to the third floor recklessly and shouted, "Our madam has given the order. Qin Wanru, come and face your death. How dare you compete with our madam for real estate? Qin Wanru, you don't want to live in the capital anymore." In order to please Madame Liu, the servants were willing to do anything. Many of them didn't know what was going on. They only knew that Madame Liu had ordered them to beat up a girl with the surname Qin, so they all started cursing. Qin Huayuan said with a dark expression, "It seems that Second Master Liu came prepared for today's appointment." Lu Hong said with a livid expression, "Master Qin, please don't misunderstand. I don't know where these people came from either." At this moment, Mrs. Liu heard Lu Heng's voice and finally realized what was going on. She vaguely felt that she had fallen into a trap. She hurriedly went up to the third floor. "Second cousin, it's me." Lu Hong stood at the top of the stairs on the third floor and looked down. He saw Mrs. Liu smiling awkwardly. "What's going on here? Master Qin and I agreed to have a drink here today, but you brought so many people here to make a scene. What are you trying to do? Do you want to commit murder on the streets?" Second cousin. Mrs. Liu was so anxious that sweat appeared on her forehead. "No, second cousin, please don't misunderstand. I wouldn't commit murder on the streets. I just heard about it. I heard she wanted to say that she was here to go against Qin Yining and to destroy the mansion that Qin Yining had bought." But halfway through her sentence, she suddenly remembered that Master Qin, who was meeting with her second cousin, was the father of that slut, Qin Yining. What was going on here? She had clearly heard that Qin Yining was discussing the mansion with someone on the third floor. How did it turn into a small gathering between her second cousin and Master Qin? Mrs. Liu realized that she had been tricked. She stood awkwardly on the spot and didn't know what to do. Lu Hong rarely showed his emotions, but today he was so angry that he almost cursed out on the spot. Qin Huayan stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said with a dark expression, "It seems that I've made a connection with the Liu family." "Don't say that, Master Qin. Please don't lower yourself to the same level as a woman. Isn't this woman from the Liu family? If you want me to lower myself to the same level as her, at least she's not hostile to my family, right?" Qin Huayan looked at Lu Hong and said, "I don't know if you've heard that someone from the Liu family is threatening to make it impossible for our family Qin to survive in the capital. Today, Mrs. Liu brought her hired thugs to pick a fight. In the future, won't she also dare to kill people on the streets?" Qin Huayuan's sharp eyes swept over Mrs. Liu's pale face. He sneered and said, "It seems that we really have to be careful. However, I don't agree with the way the Liu family teaches their daughter." Lu Heng's face flushed red. He wanted to cut Mrs. Liu into pieces. He had wanted to use today's opportunity to make Your Majesty believe that the Liu family was on good terms with the family Qin. That way, Your Majesty would distance himself from the Dayan's surrendered subjects. At the very least, Your Majesty wouldn't trust the family Qin so much. That would be the most beneficial for the family. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? The close relationship between the Liu family and the family Qin would turn into picking a fight and seeking revenge. If word of this reached Your Majesty's ears, what would he think? At the very least, his plan was ruined. However, Lu Hong felt that no matter how stupid Mrs. Liu was, she wouldn't bring her men to pick a fight with him after hearing that he was meeting someone here. There must be something fishy going on. Chapter 379. Mrs. Liu turned around with an ugly expression and saw Qin Yining's detestable face. "What are you doing here?" Qin Yining smiled. "Our family bought a house, so I'm here to look for the original owner to sign a contract. Why did Big Sister Liu barge in with so many people and speak to my father so rudely?" At this point, Qin Yining looked at Lu Heng with her beautiful eyes. Is there some misunderstanding between the Lu family and my family? Qin Yining was clearly implying that the Lu family was deliberately toying with the family Qin. Qin Huaiyuan was the one who had arranged a meeting with Qin Huaiyuan, and Qin Huaiyuan had politely booked an entire floor of drunken immortal just to meet with Lu Heng. However, Mrs. Lu had brought people to do this. If this was all arranged by the Lu family, then it would be trampling on the family Qin's dignity. Lu Heng, Mrs. Lu, and the onlookers downstairs understood this simple logic. Mrs. Lu's face was livid. Don't make irresponsible remarks. How could there be any misunderstanding between the Lu family and the family Qin? No misunderstanding? Qin Yining's face suddenly turned cold. So you're saying that big sister Lu did this on purpose? What kind of enmity does my family Qin have with big sister Lu? Why do you have to offend my father like this? Qin Yining was naturally beautiful. In her anger, her almond-shaped eyes seemed to light up like two flames. Her gaze was so bright that it was frightening. Lu Heng, who was upstairs, couldn't help but walk down slowly. Her originally gentle, jade-like beauty had suddenly turned into such an aggressive beauty. When Madame Lu saw this, she couldn't help but feel jealous and resentful. If she were 10 years younger, would she have lost her? You don't have to accuse me of something like this. I have no enmity with Lord Qin. Why would I offend him on purpose? Then why are you here? Don't tell me you brought your subordinates out for a walk and happened to pass by? You. How could Mrs. Lu not hear Qin Yining's sarcasm? But now that things had come to this, it was hard for her to defend herself. In front of Qin Yining and Qin Huaiyuan, she naturally couldn't tell them that she had received a tip-off from someone else. In order to stop Qin Yining and Lu Dehan from signing the document, she had specially come to make trouble and teach her a lesson. If it were just the two of them, she naturally wouldn't be afraid of anything. However, now that Lu Heng and Qin Huaiyuan were both here, and she didn't know that Qin Huaiyuan was on the 3rd floor, she actually said so many things that she shouldn't have. She even ordered people to deal with the people on the 3rd floor, saying that if anything happened, it would be the Lu family's fault. At this moment, when she met Lu Heng's gaze, Mrs. Lu only felt a splitting headache and chills all over her body, because she had never been in a position to make decisions for the Lu family. Just as Mrs. Lu was at a loss for words, Lu Dehan stopped 3 steps away from Qin Yining. He bowed and said, "Miss Qin, we meet again. Young Master Lu." Qin Yining returned the greeting. Lu Heng smiled at Qin Yining. His gaze was 3 parts playful, 3 parts admiring, and 4 parts understanding. He knew Mrs. Lu's temperament the best, even though she was brainless and domineering. If Mrs. Lu knew that he and Qin Huaiyuan were upstairs, she definitely wouldn't have acted the way she did just now. Therefore, Lu Heng could conclude that Mrs. Lu must have received some news and mistakenly thought that Qin Yining was upstairs. That was why she dared to act so arrogantly and caused today's incident to happen. Lu Heng saw the shocked expression on Mrs. Lu's face when she saw Qin Yining just now. She clearly couldn't believe that Qin Yining would appear here at this time. How much did Qin Yining plan and manipulate for this matter? Lu Heng didn't believe that Qin Yining would coincidentally meet someone here to discuss matters. He also didn't believe that Qin Yining's bodyguards were so useless that they couldn't obstruct Mrs. Lu's hired thugs at all. He believed that Mrs. Lu's heart was as clear as a mirror. She clearly saw through Qin Yining's plan. It was just as he had guessed. It was such an obvious trap. His plan to sow discord between Her Majesty and Qin Huaiyuan was successfully suppressed. It even included Mrs. Lu, who had offended Qin Yining a few days ago. Could this be Qin Huaiyuan's plan? After all, Qin Huaiyuan was known as Pan and the Wise. Or could it be that this extremely beautiful young woman in front of him had planned this? Lu Heng leaned towards a second guess. Because if Qin Yining had nothing to do with this matter, she wouldn't be standing here and taking the initiative to talk to Mrs. Lu. Lu Heng could feel that Qin Yining was a proud person. She didn't care about Mrs. Lu's tricks behind her back. She only wanted to step on them, who were blocking her path, openly. She wanted to directly tell them that regardless of whether it was Madame Lu's unyielding attitude towards the matter of the Qin family residence, or his attempt to drive a wedge between the Qin family and the emperor, she had seen it all clearly. Moreover, she wanted to directly strike them in the face and let them completely understand the pain. Lu Heng had never seen such a beautiful, outstanding, intelligent, and imposing woman in his life. Lu Heng felt as if someone had brushed his heart with a feather. It was itchy and soft. Even though his plan had been disrupted, no one could understand the inexplicable joy in his heart. Lu Heng's mind raced as he analyzed all of this. In fact, it only took a few breaths for him to do so. His expression didn't show any abnormalities. Please calm down, Miss Qin. Today's matter is probably a misunderstanding. I'm on good terms with Lord Qin. I don't have any ulterior motives, nor do I have any intention of humiliating you. Moreover, why would I purposely create such a situation to embarrass Lord Qin? This doesn't benefit me at all. Qin Yining smiled and said, That's right. It doesn't benefit you at all, but it greatly benefits Mrs. Lu. Didn't she threaten to make it impossible for our family Qin to stay in the capital? Lu Heng smiled and said, The Lu family has been passed down for more than 100 years. It's inevitable that there are good and bad people in the family. I'll definitely discipline them strictly when I get back. In the end, Lu Heng suddenly lowered her voice and whispered in Qin Yining's ear, Miss Qin, you're not satisfied with Madame Lu's behavior. I'll deal with everything for you when I go back. Since Miss Qin's plan has succeeded today, it's best for both of our families to stop while we're ahead. Both of our plans didn't succeed, so we'll consider a draw. How about it? Qin Yining was extremely shocked when he heard this. He didn't expect Lu Heng to see through the essence of the matter in such a short amount of time. No wonder he was able to achieve so much at such a young age. Qin Yining wasn't embarrassed by being indirectly exposed. Instead, he smiled calmly and said, Since young Master Lu says so, our family Qin naturally has to give young Master Lu face. However, young Master Lu, are you sure we'll consider it a draw? It really was her. From the meaning of her words, it was clear that today's matter was indeed planned by her. She was so confident when she told Madame Lu that she was the one behind everything that had happened today. Lu Heng's heart started to race again. Even though he was already married and had seen countless people, this feeling of his heart racing in front of a woman was something he had never experienced before. Just as Lu Heng was looking at Qin Yining's unfathomable expression, Qin Huaiyuan came downstairs to their side. Seeing that the matter had already been made clear, the family Qin couldn't really fall out with the Lu family. He said, I also believe in young Master Lu's sincerity in befriending the family Qin. I also know that young Master Lu doesn't have any ill intentions. Let's end today's matter here. It won't be too late for us to meet again when the opportunity arises in the future. Lu Heng smiled and said, That's right. Today's matter was ultimately due to our Lu family's incompetence. Lord Qin, please don't worry. I will definitely deal with this matter properly. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, There's no need to go through so much trouble. It's not worth it. This old man will take his leave first with my daughter. Lu Heng quickly glanced at Qin Yining. That bright and beautiful face was immediately imprinted in Lu Heng's memory. Then I'll see you out, Lord Qin. I don't dare. Please wait. Qin Yining called his men and followed Qin Huaiyuan downstairs. Lu Heng watched them leave before he leisurely clasped his hands behind his back and looked at Madame Lu beside him. Speak. What exactly happened today? If you can't explain yourself, I can only send you to the elders and let them decide how to deal with you. When the time comes, it won't be up to me to decide. Madame Lu finally couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She recounted everything that happened today to Lu Heng in detail. In the end, she choked up and said, Second cousin, I really didn't do it on purpose. I just heard that damned wretch Qin Yining actually went against me in public. I couldn't hold back. Lu Heng smiled and looked at Madame Lu with extreme gentleness. Listen to me now. In the future, don't make an enemy out of the family Qin, especially Qin Yining. Why? I still haven't avenged the humiliation I suffered today. Humiliation? It's precisely because of your improper conduct and unkind treatment that you ended up in this state. If you stop in time, perhaps you can retire to a manor in the countryside and enjoy the rest of your life. I'll guarantee that you won't have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your life. Madame Lu screamed with a pale face when she heard that she could retire to a manor in the countryside. No, how can I go to such a place? I definitely won't be able to eat or sleep there. Cousin, can you really bear to watch me die and not save me? Watch me die? You're getting more and more powerful now. You even learned how to bargain with me. Lu Hong was still smiling, but the smile lines at the corners of his lips gradually faded. After all, he was someone who had been in the business world for a long time. As long as he wanted to, his every move was awe-inspiring. Although Madame Lu wasn't observant enough, Lu Heng's impatient expression successfully stung her. Second cousin, I'll definitely die of frustration if I go to such a place. Second cousin, I don't want to go. The scenery in the manor is pleasant, and the population is simple. If you go there, you'll be free and unrestrained. Why don't you go? Madame Lu was convinced by the words free and unrestrained. Moreover, because of her private decision, she had unknowingly offended Lu Hong. In the end, Madame Lu could only lower her head and leave with her hired thugs. Lu Hong stood in place and stared blankly at the place where Qin Yining had stood. He couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 380. Qin Yining and Qin Huaiyuan returned home together. The father and daughter didn't show it on the way home, but when they reached the study in the outer courtyard, the servants served them tea and left. They held their teacups and smiled at each other. Madame Lu is really too impulsive. Qin Yining shook his head and said, I don't know if she's really that naive. If she is, I feel guilty for using her. Qin Huaiyuan took a sip of tea and said, Daughter, you should feel guilty for taking advantage of her, right? Qin Yining was amused and burst into laughter. She rarely saw her father joke. Today's matter went smoothly, but I don't know what the Lu family will do next. Qin Huaiyuan looked up at Qin Yining. He put down his teacup and tapped the table with his index finger. After a while, he said, You have to be careful. The Lu family won't take this lying down. They'll definitely find another opportunity to drive a wedge between your majesty and me. You're my daughter, so it's very likely that you'll become their target. Moreover, Qin Huaiyuan hesitated for a moment, but he still said what he thought. Moreover, Second Master Lu is a smart person. He must have already guessed that you were involved in today's matter. Although he had no choice but to declare his stance and expel Madame Lu from the capital, he might have already taken note of this in his heart. Qin Yining raised his eyebrows and said, If he has already taken note of this, then so be it. It's always better to have an opponent in the open than in the dark. Whatever he wants to do, we'll just have to deal with it. Qin Huaiyuan raised his eyebrows slightly. Actually, Qin Yining wasn't the only one who understood what he meant by taking note of this. He was a man and had a beautiful daughter. As a loving father, he was naturally worried that his daughter would be abducted by someone else. Therefore, he would also pay attention to any man who looked at his daughter. Second Master Lu was an extremely outstanding man. When he looked at Qin Yining just now, his eyes were astonishingly bright. Perhaps he didn't notice it and thought that he hid it well. But how could this escape the eyes of a father who only cared about his daughter? However, since Qin Yining didn't think too much about it, there was no need for him to elaborate. His daughter was very smart. When it was time to take precautions, she would naturally take precautions. Father, if your majesty gets the news, his impression of you should be better, right? Yes. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, Your majesty is a smart man. Naturally, he doesn't want his important subordinates to be incompetent. If I had been completely suppressed by the Lu clan or the Northern Ji clan as soon as I arrived, your majesty would not have been able to use me, even though it would have been easy to control me. Now, it's just nice that there's reciprocity. Qin Yining smiled. Father has always been very good at grasping these things. Your daughter will listen to you in the future. Qin Huaiyuan was amused by her and laughed heartily. He tapped her on the head and said, You're saying nice things now, but when something really happens, You might not listen to your father. Father, what are you saying? Qin Yining was not convinced. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, You're my daughter. Do you think I don't understand you? The reason why you're listening to your father now is because we're thinking the same thing. You're not a child who follows blindly. Qin Yining thought about it and felt that Qin Huaiyuan's words were quite reasonable. She didn't refute and made a face at him. This made Qin Huaiyuan laugh again. While the family Qin father and daughter were laughing happily, Li Qitian was also in a very good mood. Ever since the news of Prince Zhongshuan and Prince Consort Ji fighting spread, Li Qitian's mood had never been bad. Walking side by side with Li Helan in the Imperial Garden, Li Qitian raised her head to look at the azure sky. She felt that the biting cold air had a hint of fragrance. Although it was early spring, the Imperial Garden was still very cold and cheerless when the ice and snow had just melted. However, when her mood was good, Li Qitian found everything pleasing to the eye. Li Helan looked at Li Qitian's expression. Seeing that he was happy, she also felt very relaxed. Even Li Guanwen and the others who were following them from a distance with their Imperial bodyguards were affected. Right at this moment, an Imperial bodyguard suddenly whispered a few words into Li Guanwen's ear. Li Guanwen immediately went back to Li Qitian. Your Majesty, something big just happened outside. Li Qitian said, What exactly happened? Come here and tell us in detail. Yes. The Imperial bodyguard knelt on one knee in salute and spilled all the information he had gathered about the drunken immortal restaurant. Li Helan listened carefully from the side. In the end, she couldn't help but frown and look worriedly at Li Qitian. She had been by Madame Lu's side for a period of time in order to take Madame Lu for her own use. But now, this person was actually driven away just like that. Imperial older brother, what is the meaning of this family Qin? Isn't this too ostentatious? She actually caused older sister Lu to be sent to the estate as a punishment. She still has a lot of use. Li Qitian frowned and waved his hand. The Imperial bodyguard bowed and withdrew. He pondered for a moment and then smiled. Lan, you did very well this time. Li Helan shivered. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether Li Qitian's praise was sincere or sarcastic. Imperial older brother, Lan is afraid. Lan didn't do what Imperial older brother instructed. No, you did your best. Jin knows. Li Qitian patted Li Helan's shoulder and continued to pace forward with his hands clasped behind his back. Li Helan didn't dare to walk side by side with Li Qitian and obediently stayed a few steps behind him. She carefully thought about this matter, but couldn't find any clues. Li Qitian was in an even better mood than before. Others didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the Lu clan, but he knew very well. Especially that guy Lu Hong, who was as cunning as a fox. But Qin Huaiyuan had the ability to neutralize the Lu clan scheme. Not only did he get the estate, but he also made the Lu clan's plan to sow discord come to nothing. It seemed that Qin Huaiyuan's reputation as the wise Pan was well-deserved. Not only did he get a capable official, but he also got to see the family Qin and the Lu clan fall apart. How could he not be happy when two such good things happened at once? Add to that the increasingly estranged relationship between Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao. Everything that happened today was a good thing, and Li Helan also contributed a lot to these good things. Lan, you've worked hard today. If you want any reward, you can tell Imperial older brother. Li Helan looked at Li Qitian and hesitated for a moment. Then, she tactfully said, Lan is very satisfied to be able to share Imperial older brother's burdens. Lan is usually insensible and always makes Imperial older brother angry. It's good that Imperial older brother doesn't blame Lan. Li Qitian couldn't help but be moved when he heard this. In the end, his only sister's marriage was used by him. Li Qitian smiled and said, Later, let's go to Imperial Mother's palace to have a meal. Zhen will order Prince Consort Ji to enter the palace. Let's have a reunion dinner together. Zhen also has an important matter to arrange for Prince Consort Ji. These days, Zhen has observed his words and deeds. Zhen is very satisfied. Chapter 381. The next day, after the Imperial Court meeting, an earth-shattering piece of news spread throughout the imperial court. Jiziyu was appointed as the new commander of the Tiger Army and was temporarily stationed in the capital. The original commander of the Tiger Army, Pang Xiao, was assigned the task of supervising the Ministry of War after he moved into the cabinet. The Tiger Army was Li Qitian's weapon to intimidate the South. Pang Xiao's voice and status were extremely high, and many of them worshipped Pang Xiao. Even Pang Xiao's private Jinghu Wei was promoted from the Tiger Army. Similar to the Tiger Army, Jiziyu's Dragon Stallion Army, which was famous in the north, trusted and respected Jiziyu no less than the Tiger Army. As for Pang Xiao, however, Your Majesty's actions caused Pang Xiao to lose the Tiger Army and caused Jiziyu to lose the Dragon Stallion Army. Even though Jiziyu was in charge of the Tiger Army, which was comparable to the Dragon Stallion Army, the relationship between the upper and lower could not be as close as before. Moreover, Your Majesty still had the reputation of using these two people. On the surface, it did seem like Your Majesty valued them. When Qin Yining heard this news from a servant, she was combing Lin Xiaozhou's hair. Hearing this, her hands paused for a moment before she said, Your Majesty seems to be very satisfied with Prince Consort Ji. Considering that Prince Consort Ji just got married, she is not going to let him go back to the north. That's right, Bing Tang said. Your Majesty wants to keep these two fierce generals by her side to protect herself, so she feels more secure. Qin Yining heard Bing Tang's explanation and couldn't help but laugh. She naturally knew that Bing Tang's words had a double meaning and was mostly sarcastic. She couldn't help but remind her, Don't say this outside. Miss, I'm not stupid. I'm just saying it. How can I cause trouble for myself outside? Qin Yining tied a light blue ribbon to Lin Xiaozhou's black braids and carefully tied a beautiful bow before she laughed. That's right. Miss Bing Tang is not stupid. That's why she found a reliable tiger to get close to. Bing Tang's face turned red when she heard this. She stomped her feet and said, Miss, what are you saying? Seeing her so embarrassed, Qin Yining felt more amused. She smiled and said, Don't you understand what I said? Of Pang of the Tiger Army. What's his is? I can't be bothered with him. Qin Yining said, Oh, and said, The next time I see Wang Yi, I'll ask Wang Yi for help. I won't let Huzi visit you anymore, okay? Bing Tang's face turned red as she glared at Qin Yining. She turned around and walked out. Miss, you're not a good person. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Qin Yining was amused by Bing Tang's reaction. He patted Lin Xiaozhou's shoulder and said, Go and accompany your Bing Tang sister. She's shy. Lin Xiaozhou nodded seriously and chased after Bing Tang with a smile on her face. After Lin Xiaozhou was far away, Qin Yining sighed and said, It seems like Bing Tang still has some feelings for Huzi. See, we managed to trick her. Jian smiled and said, Miss, you really like to worry. In my opinion, even if you didn't play matchmaker, Bing Tang and Huzi's relationship is also good. They quarrel every time they see each other. After the quarrel, it's like they're good friends. Qin Yining also laughed when he heard this. If there's a chance in the future, I'll find a good family for the two of you. In the future, you can follow me and be my housekeeper. Ji Yun and Xian Yun's faces turned red. They glared at Qin Yining and said, Just like what Bing Tang said, you're really bad. Qin Yining laughed even more when he saw that the beauty's cheeks were red from being bullied by him. Unexpectedly, at this moment, there was a sudden rush of footsteps in the courtyard. A little girl rushed in hurriedly and shouted at the top of her voice, Oh no, oh no. Something happened to Master. Qin Yining's laughter stopped abruptly. His heart skipped a beat. He stood up with a pale face and rushed out in a panic. At the same time, the people living in the inner courtyard all pushed open the door and rushed out. Old Madam staggered out of the main room with a tobacco pipe in her hand. She grabbed Mammy Qin's hand and said nervously, Quickly say it. What happened to Brother Meng? That's right, you little girl. Quickly say it. The little girl realized that her words had caused panic in the entire family and became even more afraid. Her legs went soft and she knelt down, saying, It's news from outside. It said that Master was on his way back from the yamen and was hit by a horse. The sedan bearers panicked and flipped the sedan over. What? Everyone cried out in fear. Old Madam walked a few steps quickly and pointed at the little girl with the tobacco pipe. Quickly say it. Brother Meng is in big trouble. If the sedan overturned, the person must have fallen heavily. The little girl guessed so. Everyone in the family Qin also guessed so. Han's second young mistress hugged her belly that was already more than 7 months pregnant. Her body swayed, and she almost fainted. She was quickly helped down by second madam. Sun clan members asked anxiously, "Where is Master now? Where are the people following him?" The little girl said in fear. The messenger didn't say anything about this. He only said that Master is now in the East Road 5 Cities Warden's office. 5 Cities Warden's office? If he was here, at least it meant that Father wasn't in big danger. At least, he wasn't sent to the medical hall. Qin Yining finally let out a sigh of relief. Obviously, everyone in the family also thought of this point. They all wiped their cold sweat and bowed to the sky with their palms together. Qin Yining said, "I will go and check on Father's situation first." Second Master and Third Master weren't at home at this time. According to the family Qin's habits, when there was no one in the family who could stand out, the family would all rely on Qin Yining to make decisions. Sun clan members nodded without hesitation and said, "Go with your cousin. You will have one more helper and won't be at a disadvantage." Old Madam also nodded repeatedly and said, "Quickly come back and report after seeing the situation." "Yes, Old Madam." Qin Yining curtsied and went back to his room to grab a cloak and put it on. He also called for Ji Yun to accompany him and went out to ask someone to prepare a carriage. Qin Yu and Qin Han didn't hesitate and followed the carriage to the East Road 5 Cities Warden's office. When they arrived at the door and explained their purpose, they didn't expect that those people didn't stop them. Instead, they were very friendly when they led the way. Qin Yining began to guess which faction these people belonged to. The current imperial court was divided into aristocratic families, imperial power, meritorious officials, old officials, and dying officials who surrendered. It was the best time to take advantage of the situation. Although Qin Yining had guesses in his heart, he didn't dwell on it and rushed to the inner court with his 2 cousins. At this time, the commander of the East Road, Zheng Darren, was giving orders to his subordinates at the door. When he raised his head and saw Qin Yining, Qin Han, and Qin Yu, he came forward and politely said, "So, it's the family Qin's 2 young masters and Miss Qin." The 3 didn't recognize Zheng Darren and politely greeted him. Chapter 382. Lord Zheng smiled and said, "Miss Qin, young Master Qin, there's no need to worry. Lord Qin is fine. We'll know once we enter." Qin Yining hurriedly expressed his thanks and entered through the door behind Lord Zheng with Qin Han and Qin Yu. The furnishings in the room were no different from those in the central hall of an ordinary household. As soon as they stepped through the threshold, they saw Qin Huayuan sitting at the head of the table with a solemn expression. Behind him were 4 attendants with ordinary faces. They still had the kind of ordinary faces that couldn't be picked out if they were thrown into a crowd. "Father, are you all right?" Qin Yining quickly stepped forward. "Are you injured?" "That's right, uncle. We were all frightened when we heard that something had happened to you," Qin Han added. When Qin Huayuan saw his nephew, he revealed a faint smile. "I'm fine. Fortunately, the people I brought with me caught me. If I hadn't fallen from the sedan chair and been trampled by the galloping horses, you wouldn't have been able to see me alive." Qin Yining's heart trembled when he heard this. "Father, the road back home from Yamen is a bustling street in the capital. How could there be a herd of horses?" Qin Huayan said, "Father is also surprised that there would be a group of Yamens riding horses right under the emperor's nose. They don't care if the pedestrians are injured. Today, they crashed into my sedan chair. What if they trampled someone to death tomorrow?" When Qin Yining saw Qin Huayuan sitting there sulking, he guessed that something was amiss. After all, the people riding horses today were a group of officials. Dezhou's laws were indeed quite sound. However, sound laws only applied to ordinary people. The fathers, brothers, or grandfathers of these officials were the ones who created these laws. In this day and age, it wasn't strange for people to be covered up for doing bad things. Qin Han and Qin Yu's expressions weren't very good either. After all, they came from the Dian dynasty and had experienced the rule of an incapable ruler. They couldn't help but worry about this country. The decay of a country couldn't be caused overnight. It must have been caused over a long period of time. The Zhou had only been established for a short period of time, yet such a situation had already occurred. They were very worried about the future. Just as the room fell silent, the door was pushed open and Lord Zheng walked in. Qin Huaiyuan looked at Mr. Zheng calmly and asked, "Have you found out who did it?" Sir Zheng's face was covered in sweat. He didn't bother to take out his handkerchief and wiped it with his sleeve. He said with a smile, "Sir Qin, don't be anxious. Our brothers in the warden's office of the 5 cities do this for a living. Right now, they've already gone all over the city to catch them. However, the capital was so big that it was impossible to get any news in such a short time. Look, aren't you?" Qin Yining, Qin Han, and Qin Yu looked at each other, and they all knew what was going on. No matter how big the capital was, it was impossible that they couldn't catch a few second generations riding horses in the market for so long. The only possibility was that the warden's office of the 5 cities couldn't afford to offend these people. Or there was someone behind the scenes who wanted to protect these outrageous people. Qin Yining was secretly angry. Weren't these people just bullying her father because he was an outsider? If this was in the past, although the Dian court was a little corrupt, no one would dare to bully her father except for the self-indulgent ruler. When Qin Huaiyuan heard this, he smiled warmly and said politely, "Thank you for your concern, Lord Zheng." "You're welcome." Seeing that Qin Huaiyuan was so easy to talk to, Lord Zheng secretly sighed in relief. Just as he was about to persuade Qin Huaiyuan to go home and wait for news, Qin Huaiyuan spoke first. "I believe in the warden's office of the 5 cities. They will be able to catch the culprits soon." The warden's office of the 5 cities was in charge of the security of the capital. They were already familiar with this kind of thing. Moreover, these people's unreasonable actions were a hidden danger to the safety of the common people. Today, this official encountered them. This official knows your Majesty's wisdom and naturally won't think too much. However, if one day the common people were to be trampled on, injured, or even lose their lives, how would the people below judge your Majesty? Therefore, for the sake of your Majesty's reputation, for the sake of the brothers of the 5 cities warden's office, and for the sake of seeking justice for myself, this official has decided to wait here. Lord Zheng was flabbergasted. He was an uncouth man, so it took him a while to understand what Qin Huaiyuan was trying to say. To put it bluntly, he wasn't going to leave. He was going to wait here for them to catch the culprits. Otherwise, they would be disregarding your Majesty's reputation, and he could go to your Majesty to complain about him, old Zheng. More sweat appeared on Lord Zheng's forehead. Qin Huaiyuan continued to smile and said, "Lord Zheng, please sit down and rest for a while. You must be tired from just now." Well said, well said." Lord Zheng smiled and sat down. He was just a scholar with a weak body, so why was his gaze so frightening when he looked at people? It made people involuntarily want to obey him. Qin Yining, Qin Han, and Qin Yu looked at each other again. Their worried hearts finally relaxed. Qin Yining realized that as long as her father was there, she really wasn't afraid of anything. Even though she was sitting in the 5 cities warden's office waiting for news, she didn't feel nervous at all. Although they were calm and composed, Lord Zheng was about to cry. He was just doing his job as usual. What crime did he commit in a fight between immortals? He wanted to persuade this great Buddha to leave, but he also knew that Qin Huaiyuan wouldn't let this matter rest. After all, he held a high position and was highly regarded by your Majesty. In addition, after the incident with the Liu family a few days ago, everyone knew that family Qin was a tough nut to crack. If anyone had the intention to bully others, they might be the unlucky one. But what could he do? He could only send people out again to investigate carefully. Even if he had to flip the roof of someone's house, he had to find the culprit. In such a tense atmosphere, it was easy for people to become impatient just sitting there and waiting. Lord Zheng's sweat was almost soaking his clothes. Qin Huaiyuan, on the other hand, remained calm and composed. He was neither anxious nor impatient. Under his influence, Qin Yining was also very calm. They waited like this for more than 2 hours. Finally, there was a commotion outside. Someone from the Five Cities Warden's office brought in a young man dressed in a light blue brocade robe. The young man's appearance was ordinary, and he had a timid temperament. Seeing everyone's eyes on him, the young man smiled awkwardly. He didn't know what to say. Lord Zheng said happily, "This is the person who offended Lord Qin today. What does Lord Qin think?" The young man became even more nervous, but he still maintained a calm expression. He raised his chin high and said, "Kill me if you want. I'm not afraid." Chapter 383. The young man grew more and more nervous. He stared at Qin Huaiyuan with wide eyes. He was clearly very afraid, but he still forced himself to be strong. "Lord Han is my father." "Oh, so it's nephew." Qin Huaiyuan smiled and nodded. Seeing Qin Huaiyuan speak so warmly and call the young man nephew, Lord Zheng inwardly let out a sigh of relief. The young man also let out a long sigh. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, "This official is new here, and Assistant Minister Han has helped me a lot in the Ministry of Rights. I heard that Assistant Minister Han's son is skilled in both the pen and the sword, and is both brave and resourceful. Now that I've met him, it seems that this is indeed the case." Young Master Han became nervous again. He swallowed and didn't know how to respond. Because although these words sounded like praise, why did it feel so awkward? Lord Zheng smiled and said, "Who would have thought that the flood would rush against the Dragon King's temple? Minister Qin and Assistant Minister Han are both capable officials in the Ministry of Rights. What do you think about this matter?" Actually, the Five Cities Warden's office had already found out who the person who rode the horse today was. Lord Zheng knew in his heart. However, the person who rode the horse was supported by the Liu family. They couldn't afford to offend them. On the surface, it looked like a few Yamen riders had offended Lord Qin. But in reality, it was a struggle between the Liu family and the Dian officials who had surrendered. Lord Zheng felt that he was really unlucky to be involved in this kind of dispute for no reason. He didn't dare to express his opinion because he had always maintained a neutral position. He didn't want to offend anyone, and he couldn't afford to offend anyone. Now, he could only hope that Qin Huaiyuan was someone who could settle this matter peacefully. Seeing that he and the young man's father were both officials in the Ministry of Rights, it would be fine for him to turn a big matter into a small one and a small matter into nothing. Qin Yining looked at this scene and felt bad for his father. Qin Huaiyuan was a newcomer, and Your Majesty had suddenly promoted him to become a minister in the Ministry of Rights. This kind of sudden superior was the easiest to ostracize by his subordinates, especially someone like the Assistant Minister of Rights, who had already reached a very high position. She didn't believe that the culprit was this cowardly brat. But since the Five Cities Warden's office had brought him here, he had no choice but to admit it. The reason why Sir Zheng decided to do this was to push Qin Huaiyuan into the heart of the struggle. If Qin Huaiyuan did not handle this matter properly, he would be able to create a conflict between him and Assistant Minister Han, and deepen the conflict between the surrendered subjects of Great Yin and the remaining elders of Northern Ji. Now that he thought about it, the matter was indeed difficult to handle. Qin Yining looked at Qin Huaiyuan worriedly. Qin Huaiyuan stood up and cupped his hands towards Lord Zheng. "Lord Zheng, since we've already caught the culprit, let's leave this matter to the warden's office. After all, I am an official of the Ministry of Rights. How to deal with people who ride horses on the streets is not within my jurisdiction. Lord Zheng is a capable person of the warden's office of the Five Cities and has dealt with countless similar cases over the years. I will not overstep my authority." When Lord Zheng heard this, the sweat on his head became even more obvious. As expected of the wise pan, and his brain worked really fast. The ball that had been kicked over with great difficulty was kicked back to him. Qin Yining, Qin Han, and Qin Yu inwardly sighed in relief. They couldn't help but admire Qin Huaiyuan's quick-wittedness. Lord Zheng said unwillingly, "Lord Qin is His Majesty's capable minister. How can I, an uncouth old man, compare to you? Isn't this kind of thing a piece of cake for you?" Qin Huaiyuan's smile was gentle as he said slowly, "Lord Zheng's talent is not to be outdone. Why are you being so modest? I'll have to trouble you with this matter. I believe that Lord Zheng will give Your Majesty a satisfactory answer. In other words, if Lord Zheng dared to cover up this matter, Qin Huaiyuan would definitely report him without mercy. For a moment, Lord Zheng felt like crying, but had no tears. At this time, he suddenly realized that the so-called Dian faction of surrendered officials was now the same as the nobles faction. They could all be called Your Majesty's faction. Your Majesty has surrendered officials and nobles of the Yin dynasty under his command. Whether it's dealing with the Liu family or the Northern Ji family, isn't it just a matter of time? Lord Zheng felt that it was time for him to declare his position. Because although the neutral faction didn't offend anyone, it was also possible to offend everyone. With a frown, Lord Zheng personally sent Qin Huaiyuan, Qin Yining, Qin Yu, and Qin Han off. He still had a frown on his face when he sent them to the carriage. Qin Huan, however, was smiling wholeheartedly and his attitude was gentle. He thanked Lord Zheng and politely said goodbye. When the carriage was far away from the warden's office of the 5 cities, Qin Han couldn't help but laugh. Great uncle, that move of yours just now was really brilliant. I was stumped just now. I didn't expect uncle to think of a way to deal with him in the blink of an eye. That's right. Qin Yu also said that Lord Zheng must know who was the one who really drove the horse. Uncle suffered a loss, but he still wanted Uncle to help him save face. He also wanted Uncle to give up. There's no reason for him to bully people like that. In the end, it's because we just arrived into Zhou and have a shallow foundation, Qin Yining also said. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and shook his head, saying, this is normal. There's no need to take it to heart. Qin Yining saw that his father was so open-minded and admired him even more. Father, are you injured? Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, I'm not injured at all. The bodyguards trained by the Chao family are not for nothing. The sedan was just about to overturn when I was rescued. Qin Yining laughed. Then father should reward them well. After all, they worked hard this time. Of course. Qin Han and Qin Yu didn't understand what Qin Huaiyuan and Qin Yining were talking about, but when they heard the father and daughter talking like this, the two of them smiled. They were both people from a proper family Qin. When they saw other people's happiness, they would also be happy. It didn't take long for the carriage to arrive at the family Qin. As soon as the carriage stopped, a servant who had been guarding the entrance ran into the mansion to report. A servant came up to greet them and saluted them. Qin Yining got off the carriage and followed his father and elder brother into the courtyard. At this time, the Sun clan quickly came out to greet them. Seeing that Qin Huaiyuan was safe and sound, she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Her eyes were moist as she asked, was Master hurt? Seeing his beloved wife like this, Qin Huaiyuan couldn't help but explain to her. When he entered the room and saw the Dowager Duchess, he naturally had to explain again. When the Dowager Duchess heard that the people riding horses on the street were the second generations of the Zhou's officials, she couldn't help but feel angry and anxious. This group of people is so domineering. Their parents don't know how to discipline them. But Brother Meng, we're newcomers. Can we afford to offend them? The Dowager Duchess's attitude was the same as before. She admitted defeat when it came to Qin Yining, and she was still the same when it came to Qin Huaiyuan. Qin Yining and the Sun clan didn't feel comfortable. Chapter 384. Qin Huaiyuan had always been calm and steady. No matter what happened in the past, he was always able to remain calm. He was like a stabilizing needle that stabilized the hearts of the entire family. When the Dowager Duchess heard her son's words, she felt much more relaxed. She patted the back of Qin Huaiyuan's hand and said, Brother Meng, you have to be more careful in the future. None of these second-generation Scions who ride horses on the streets have simple backgrounds. If they dare to run on the streets, it means that they aren't afraid of hurting people. Even if someone is really injured or trampled to death, they can only blame themselves for being unlucky. These people have ways to clear their names. Whoever suffers a loss will suffer for nothing. You're right, Mother. Qin Huaiyuan smiled gently. The Dowager Duchess said, Therefore, you should avoid this matter in the future. Fortunately, no one was injured this time, so let's forget about it. Seeing that the Dowager Duchess was holding on to Qin Huaiyun and was about to lecture him again, Qin Yining smiled and said, "The Dowager Duchess is too worried about father. You must be tired. Why don't you go back and rest first?" When the Dowager Duchess heard this, the words that she wanted to continue nagging were stuck in her throat. She glared at Qin Yining and wanted to say more. However, when she met her son's calm eyes, she couldn't bring herself to continue nagging. Everyone dispersed. The Sun Clan and Qin Huaiyuan went to talk alone. Qin Yining didn't want to disturb his parents, so he didn't go to the Sun Clan's room and directly went back to rest. She thought that today's matter was so big that it was likely that everyone knew about it. She just didn't know how the warden's office and Shuntian Prefecture would deal with it. It was obvious that the youth was used as a scapegoat. The person behind the scenes hadn't been dug out yet. Even if they sentenced him, it wouldn't be of much use. Qin Yining's heart felt stifled and panicked. After this incident, it wasn't just Qin Yining. Qin Yu and Qin Han also experienced for the first time the difficulties of Qin Huaiyuan. Because Qin Huaiyuan handled everything too easily, they almost forgot that Qin Huaiyuan was just a normal person with flesh and blood. What surprised Qin Yining was that the next afternoon, there were already rumors outside. The son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Han Lin, rode his horse in the middle of the street and offended an official of the imperial court. Furthermore, he did not show any signs of repentance. After investigation, he was sent to the Yamen of Shuntian Prefecture by the warden of 5 cities. The Yamen of Shuntian Prefecture found no mistakes and sentenced Han Lin to be exiled 3,000 li. When Qin Yining heard this, she was dumbfounded. "You said he was exiled for 3,000 miles? This servant is sure." "It is indeed 3,000 li." Ji Yun observed Qin Yining's expression and saw that he didn't seem to believe it. She said, "That person surnamed Han offended our family's master. Fortunately, our master is fine. If there really was something wrong, not to mention 3,000 li, even beheading wouldn't be enough to compensate for it. Miss is too kind. There is no need to be upset over this kind of person." Qin Yining came back to his senses. He smiled slightly and shook his head. "You're overthinking. I'm not thinking about this matter. That Han Lin was only used as a scapegoat. The Minister of Rights isn't a small official. To be willing to let his son take the blame for someone else, the real culprit must have a high status." When Qian heard that, he nodded and said, "It's like this. Under the emperor's rule, there is no lack of high-ranking officials in the capital. If a plaque falls, it can hit 3 officials. It's very complicated." "That's right." Qin Yining faintly sighed. Although this matter was investigated by the military office of the 5 cities and Shuntian Prefecture, it was still my father's fault. However, this matter started because of my father, so I'm worried that they will take revenge. Qin Yining thought for a moment, then called Jingzhu over and said, "Go and tell my father's brothers to be careful during this period of time. They must not let those rascals take advantage of any loopholes." "Yes, Mississippi, don't worry." Jingzhu bowed and went to carry out the orders. However, it seemed that Qin Yining's worries were unnecessary, because in the next few days, Qin Huaiyuan continued as usual. Nothing happened. Qin Yining also felt that perhaps he was overthinking things. Perhaps that group of people wanted to minimize the problem and didn't want to cause any more trouble. After a few days, it was already spring and the flowers were in full bloom. Qin Yining changed into spring clothes and ordered someone to prepare a carriage. "Let's go out for a stroll. I haven't seen Master Zhong in a while." "Yes." When Bing Tang heard that they were going out for a stroll, he immediately said happily, "Miss, we haven't gone out for a long time. Xiakongi is bored at home. Why don't we bring Xiakongi along?" Their house was not as spacious as it used to be. Although they could live there, it was inconvenient for them to move around. No matter how sensible Lien Xiaozhou was, she was still a child. Bing Tang truly cared for Lien Xiaozhou. Whenever they had the chance to go out, they would naturally bring her along. Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. He pulled Lien Xiaozhou's hand and said, "Your Bing Tang's sister cares for you so much. She thinks of you whenever something good happens. Don't forget about her in the future." Lien Xiaozhou smiled and nodded. She still couldn't speak clearly. She could use nodding, shaking her head, and blinking to replace her words. Now, she was very skilled at using these words. Lien Xiaozhou nodded Qin Yining's shoulder and said, "Sister is good too. I won't forget either." Qin Yining was stunned. His heart instantly warmed up. He smiled and gently pinched Lien Xiaozhou's cheek, causing her to giggle. The carriage outside was ready. Qin Yining brought Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and Lien Xiaozhou into the carriage. In addition, he brought along Jing Zhe and the other 3 spies. Xian Yun and Xiao Lu stayed at home to look after the house. There were 4 attendants outside the large carriage. This group was not conspicuous. They left the family Qin house in a low-key manner. They circled around the back and chose to go to the bustling market. Although it was a bit far to go to Master Zhong, they were going to relax today, so they didn't mind taking a detour for a while. Qin Yining held Lien Xiaozhou's hand and pointed outside through the window screen to teach her some general knowledge. Lien Xiaozhou listened very seriously. Bing Tang and Ji Yun chatted and laughed softly at the side. From time to time, bursts of laughter could be heard from the carriage, causing the 4 spies outside to relax. However, just as the carriage was moving to the side of the market, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from the front. Jing Zhe heard the sound and looked up. He saw 7 or 8 men in luxurious clothes riding tall horses. They were rushing towards them without slowing down. The coachman saw that the situation was not good and hurriedly reined in the horse. The horses were also shocked by the group of people coming towards them. They neighed loudly and raised their front hooves. Qin Yining and the other 3 spies in the carriage were thrown off their horses by the bumpy ride. Young man quickly jumped into the carriage and held the reins to stabilize the carriage. She stood in front of the carriage door. Jing Zhe, Xiao Shui, and Han stood in front of the carriage in a triangular formation. Chapter 385. The maroon horse was extremely fast. The young man on the horse had already planned this beforehand, so he naturally went all out. However, Jingzhu was highly skilled in martial arts, and his internal martial arts had also reached perfection. The horse galloping over had more than 1,000 caddies of force behind it. Jingzhu slapped down with his palm, causing the horse to neigh and spit out blood as it fell to the ground. The young man on the horse was dressed in a blue brocade robe. The smile on his face from the galloping horse abruptly disappeared, and his mind went blank. Before he could react, he was knocked to the ground by his horse, and his head hit the ground. The young man only heard a buzzing sound in his ears, and then he lost consciousness. Seeing that their leader had been so easily knocked to the ground with a single palm strike, not even having the time to make a sound, and not knowing whether he was dead or alive, the second-generation young masters following behind the young man also pulled on their reins, looking worriedly at the person who had fallen to the ground and was unable to get up. Jingzhi still stood at the top of the class and looked at the crowd with a gloomy expression. "Who are you? How dare you ride a horse and try to murder my family's young lady? And who are you? How dare you, a servant, kill the young master of the Chung family?" As they spoke, a young man jumped off his horse and rushed towards the carriage. "She's just a little slut from outside. She should have stayed at home after she was done playing with her. Why did she come out for a stroll? Don't you?" Jingzhi's eyes turned sharp, and he raised his hand to give the second-generation young master a hard slap. "I told you not to keep your mouth clean. Slap, ouch." The young man spun twice on the spot from the slap, and his vision turned black as he fell to the ground on his butt. These people were used to running amok in the capital. A few days ago, they had only accidentally startled the Qin family's carriages and horses. Unexpectedly, that spineless surrendered official, Qin Huayuan, had chased them down and beaten them up. The one who had fainted was Cheng Yu, the only son of the newly appointed Minister of War, Cheng Meng. It was also Cheng Yu who had crashed into Qin Huayuan's carriage. However, after the Minister of War's investigation, they were all fine, but the son of the Assistant Minister of Rights had been caught as a scapegoat and sentenced to exile. They were all loyal to their brothers. Because of Qin Huayuan's narrow-mindedness, their brother was exiled and his life was ruined. How could they let it go? Qin Huayuan is an important official of Your Majesty. Even when they were at home, their parents told them not to provoke Qin Huaiyuan. However, they couldn't afford to offend Qin Huaiyuan. Qin Huaiyuan still had a daughter who had been toyed with by Prince Zhongshuan. Therefore, they had always sent people to wait outside the family Qin's small courtyard, waiting for Qin Yining to come out. How could they let go of such a rare opportunity? Wasn't Qin Huaiyuan stingy? Wasn't he afraid of letting his horse crash into the carriage? They were going to perform the same thing on his daughter again. Who would have thought that Qin Yining was only a woman? Qin Huaiyuan was actually willing to arrange such overbearing bodyguards to accompany such a withered woman. Was Qin Huaiyuan crazy? You actually dared to hit this young master. Do you know who this young master is? It doesn't matter who you are. What matters is that you want to hurt my daughter. Jingzhe stood in front of the carriage with a cold face, scaring all the people who could possibly crash into the carriage into not daring to move. The commotion here had already alerted many people to come and watch. Several Yamen officials saw that the situation was not right and wanted to run away. However, Chengyu was still unconscious on the ground. They didn't dare to leave Chengyu alone here. A few people who were close to Chengyu dismounted from their horses to check on Chengyu's condition. Then, they began to curse at the carriage. There were also some who simply followed the crowd to watch the commotion. Seeing that the situation was not good, they were afraid that Qin Yining's bodyguards would act in self-defense. If there were any casualties, the situation would be irreparable. There were also some who were quick-witted enough to give orders to their manservants. There were also some who went to the 5 cities Yamen to report the situation. There were also some who went to each family to report the situation. Qin Yining had been sitting in the carriage with his arms around Lian Xiaozhou the entire time. He stopped Bingtang and Ji Yun from lifting the curtain and quarreling with the people outside. She tapped her finger with the lotus jade ring on the small table and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid that these people have been planning this for a long time. Their identities are not simple. Tell Jingzhe to stop hurting people." "Yes." Young man, who was separated by a curtain, answered in a low voice. Then, she gritted her teeth and said, "It's only because we're in the Great Zhou that we can't do anything about it. If we were in the past, we would have killed him. Let's see if these people dare to speak rudely to Miss." The secret agents used to be the Emperor's subordinates. Even if they poked a hole in the sky, there would be someone to clean up the aftermath. Naturally, they would do things by hook or by crook, regardless of the consequences. Because they had developed this habit, their so-called mercy was just not directly killing. If it were a normal bodyguard, the first thing he would do when a horse was approaching was to subdue the horse and lure it away. He wouldn't kill the horse with one slap. How many normal people had this ability? Who would have the guts to do so? Outside the carriage, the second-generation nobles had already started cursing. Miss Qin, I heard that you are devastatingly beautiful. Since we are no longer chaste women, why don't you come out and let us take a look?" "Haha, that's right. We are all people of extraordinary status. Any one of us would be able to afford a concubine. Miss Qin, if you are willing to be our concubine, we will not be calculative about your mistakes. These people are really disgusting with their filthy words." Bingtang was so angry that he gritted his teeth. Ji Yin had already put her hand on the soft sword at her waist. If Miss Qin hadn't ordered them to stay calm, she would have rushed out and stabbed hundreds of holes in that person's body. Jingzhe, young man, Xiao Shui, and Han, who were outside the carriage, also wished that they could kill all these scum immediately. However, they didn't receive any orders, so they could only endure and not act rashly. The chaos here alarmed more and more people who were watching. Some people had already started to point at the carriage, and some even sneered at the government officials' domineering behavior of blocking the carriage. There were all sorts of discussions among the commoners. Gradually, they closed in and surrounded the two parties in the middle. There were also people who had heard of Qin Huaiyuan and pointed at the carriage. At this time, Qin Yining was still calm. He held Lian Xiaozhou's small hand and taught her to write in her palm. It was as if no one was cursing outside, and she was only listening to a dog's barking. At this time, there was a sudden commotion outside the crowd. The crowd parted to two sides like Moses parting the sea. Lord Zheng, the commander of the East Road of the military department of the Five Cities, rushed in with his subordinates and separated the two parties who were at daggers drawn. Chapter 386. Even Lord Zheng wanted to find a master to check if there was something wrong with him recently. Why did this kind of shocking thing happen all the time? Moreover, both sides were from different factions in the imperial court and were not to be trifled with. Come on, send young Master Cheng to the clinic. Lord Zheng didn't dare to let Minister Cheng's son kill anyone. The eldest son of Minister Cheng Meng of the Ministry of War died young. After that, he had been working hard to continue the family line. He had many concubines, and they gave birth to 7 fairies, but only Cheng Yu was his only son. Minister Cheng didn't expect Cheng Yu to have a bright future. He just wanted him to continue the family line peacefully. Therefore, he wasn't very strict with him. That was why he was spoiled and raised to have a reckless temperament. Ever since Cheng Meng became the Minister of War, Cheng Yu's domineering behavior became even more severe. He often got together with his friends who were also in the Yamen and often caused some trouble. Lord Zheng had been in the warden's office for a long time and often dealt with these foppish sons of rich families. For the sake of his father's relationship with them, he usually turned a blind eye and let them off easily. Who knew that Cheng Yu would take things so hard that he would go against a family Qin people? If it was in the past, Lord Zheng could certainly cover for him. But now, Your Majesty valued Qin Huaiyuan the most. He had been forced to stand on the emperor's side. He thought that since he stood on the emperor's side, they wouldn't make trouble and live in peace. Who would have thought that the faction supported by the Liu family would go against Qin Huaiyuan's faction that supported the emperor? Now that the public opinion of this case was so strong and he was in charge of it, Lord Zheng couldn't cover for either side. Miss Qin. Lord Zheng came to the carriage and cupped his hands. Miss Qin, you have to go to the Five Cities Warden's office today. Young man said, My girl is the victim. The culprit is that group of unreasonable people. Why do you still want to arrest my girl? Lord Zheng quickly said, Miss Qin, don't misunderstand. I'm not arresting you this time. I just need to ask some questions. Qin Yining had been waiting for this moment. He said in a friendly voice, Sir, there's no need to make things difficult for me. I'll go with you. I also believe that you'll be able to give me a clear explanation. Yes, that is my duty. I will naturally deal with it impartially. That's good. Qin Yining's voice was very gentle, making people feel comfortable. It was very common for a girl to bring her family to the market in a carriage. Unfortunately, they were met with this group of second-generation nobles charging their horses. Coupled with the incident in Qin Huaiyuan a few days ago and the same group of people involved in today's incident, Lord Zheng could already conclude that this should be a long-planned revenge. Presumably, the Yamen was also very surprised at this moment. No one would have thought that a young lady's bodyguard would have such a strong martial arts prowess. However, Lord Zheng could understand. For example, Cheng Yu was the only son of Minister Cheng's family. Qin Yining was the only daughter of Qin Huaiyuan. Qin Huaiyuan didn't even have a son. He only had this one daughter. Speaking of which, compared to Minister Cheng and the 7 fairies, Qin Huaiyuan doted on Qin Yining less than Minister Cheng doted on his only son. This was really a bad debt. After persuading Qin Yining, Lord Zheng turned to persuade the group of second-generation nobles who were flustered and exasperated. Compared to Qin Yining, who was well-educated and reasonable, this group of people was not so easy to deal with. Since Lord Zheng's persuasion failed, he had to resort to forceful means. In a half-soft, half-hard way, he brought them back to the Yamen of the Five Cities Warden's office. Qin Yining's carriage slowly came to a stop. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, and Lian Xiaozhou got off the carriage one after another. Finally, they came forward to help Qin Yining. On the other side, several Yamen officials looked over curiously. They wanted to see what kind of woman could charm Prince Zhongshuan to the point that he didn't care about avenging his father's death and forcibly snatched her back. They saw a fair hand reach out and place it on the maidservant's hand. Then they saw a beautiful face that was as beautiful as peach blossoms. As she got off the carriage, everyone's eyes were glued to her body. She was born with an exquisite figure. Her height was considered average among northern women, but was considered tall among southern women. She glanced coldly at them. Her bright and beautiful almond-shaped eyes flashed. She didn't say a word, but she could seduce people's souls. No wonder. No wonder Prince Zhongshuan couldn't get past the beauty's charms. The Yamen officials didn't feel good for a moment. They didn't even get to take advantage of her today. Qin Yining didn't get off the carriage, and they didn't hear her retort. Could it be that they could only watch foolishly? But now, they really couldn't think of a way to get this person. Everyone walked to the front hall. Official Zheng ordered people to serve tea to both sides. The young man who was slapped by Jingzhe drank a mouthful of tea. He pointed at Jingzhe, who was standing behind Qin Yining, and shouted, "Official, this person committed a violent crime on the street. Why didn't you arrest him?" Jingzhe and the other 3 people followed Bingtang and stood quietly behind Qin Yining with their heads lowered. Jingzhe didn't even raise his eyebrows in the face of the young man's accusation. He still kept his head lowered and looked very obedient. At this time, the secret agents looked like ordinary people's attendants. It was impossible to tell that they were people with skills like the one just now. If it wasn't for the young man's swollen face in front of him, Official Zheng wouldn't have believed it. Official Zheng asked, "Did this person really commit a violent crime?" Qin Yining raised his eyes to look at Official Zheng and said gently, "My attendants only wanted to protect their master. Today's situation was very bad. We didn't provoke them first. We were just walking on the street when this group of people rode their horses and charged towards us. My attendants are trained in martial arts. In order to protect me, they killed the leader's horse. As for that person who was sent to the Yamen of the medical center, he fell because he wasn't skilled enough. It has nothing to do with my attendants. And this young master." After saying this, Qin Yining raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man with the swollen face. His gaze was penetrating, as if he could see through the depths of that person's heart. The young man only felt his face heat up. Even the slap didn't hurt. Being stared at by a beauty like this, he felt a little dizzy. Qin Yining's voice was still neither fast nor slow. He said gently and politely, "This young master's face was indeed slapped by my attendants. However, my attendants aren't people who hit people for no reason. It's just that their words were too filthy." Official Zheng asked, "What did they say?" When Qin Yining heard this, he lowered his head and said, "Filthy words. It's very embarrassing. It doesn't matter if Official Zheng doesn't believe me. There were many witnesses on the street just now. Official Zheng can ask anyone." Official Zheng nodded. He was very satisfied with Qin Yining's gentle and polite attitude. However, before Official Zheng could say anything, the young man who was closer to Chengyu began to argue. These people were all sons of officials. For a moment, Official Zheng didn't know how to deal with them. Just as he was in a dilemma, a commotion suddenly came from outside. Immediately after, someone in the corridor shouted in a panic, "Sir, bad news. Minister Cheng has surrounded our yamen with his soldiers." "What?" Official Zheng stood up abruptly. His eyes widened in disbelief. Although the Minister of War was in charge of the Ministry of War, he couldn't move soldiers as he pleased. Your Majesty had to give the order to move soldiers, and the tiger seal had to match. Now that Minister Cheng had secretly moved soldiers to surround the 5 cities warden's office, it was obvious that he was really angry because of his beloved son's coma. He didn't care about anything else. A thin layer of cold sweat appeared on Official Zheng's back. If this matter wasn't handled well, it was very likely that it would lead to chaos in the city. When Your Majesty blamed him, it wasn't something a small commander like him could bear. Official Zheng was about to walk out. However, after taking 2 steps, he stopped. He turned around to look at the group of arrogant people in the yamen, and then looked at the attendants beside Qin Yining who looked ordinary but were actually very skilled. With him here, these people wouldn't dare to be impudent. If he wasn't here, if he didn't manage to persuade them outside and a fight broke out in the room, and a few more people got injured, he might not even be able to keep his position. Thinking of this, Official Zheng hurriedly ordered his most capable attendant, "Go, quickly go outside and ask Minister Cheng to come in. Remember, you must persuade him nicely. Yes. The attendant hurriedly left the room and went through the hall to the front door. Who would have thought that just as he poked half his body out of the door, he would be frightened by the scene in front of him? The location of the yamen wasn't considered remote, but there were many people and residents around. Now, the people walking around were so scared that they retreated. The people brought by Minister Changyu had already surrounded the entrance of the Minister of War's office. The other party had brought more than 500 people, which was more than 100 times the number of people in the 5 cities warden's office. Just by looking at the group of people at the front and seeing that they were all pale with fright, it was enough to see how tense the situation was. The attendant swallowed his saliva and hurriedly gathered his courage to persuade him. Minister Chung was now over 40 years old, but his body was tall and his face was full of fierceness. He didn't look like someone who was almost 50 years old. He originally had a rough appearance. Now that he was furious, his thick eyebrows were raised even more, as if he couldn't wait to swallow people into his stomach. Perhaps because of official Zhang's face, or perhaps because Minister Chung himself knew that he couldn't make a big deal of this matter. He finally followed into the yamen. All of you guard outside. Don't move without my orders. Yes. The officers and soldiers replied in unison. Minister Chung strode all the way to the front hall. When official Zhang saw that Minister Chung was willing to come in, he immediately let out a sigh of relief and welcomed him with a smile. Who would have thought that Minister Chung would push official Zhang away and point at Qin Yining and curse, "You bastard! You dare to harm my son! Give me your life!" As he spoke, he rushed over with a fist. Who would have thought that the Minister of War would actually attack the yamen of the 5 cities warden's office? Everyone was caught off guard and was shocked for a moment. Chapter 387. Originally, Qin Yining was able to calmly watch the fight. She had absolute confidence in the silver-masked secret agent skills. However, after the fight started, Qin Yining stood up with a frown. She didn't expect the domineering and reckless Minister Chung to be so skilled in martial arts. Jing Zhe and the other 3 had to join forces to stop him. Minister Chung glared at Qin Yining, as if he wanted to skin him alive. Seeing how brave he was, the yamen servants who were riding their horses also laughed and cheered him on. It seemed that they wanted to please Minister Chung, but it also seemed that they wanted to provoke him. Their words were even more disrespectful to Qin Yining. Official Zhang saw that the room was in chaos. The tables and chairs were smashed, and the porcelain tea set was also broken. The broken porcelain was scattered all over the floor. Although Qin Yining's 4 bodyguards were skilled, they didn't dare to hurt the imperial court officials because of their previous experience. Therefore, they were somewhat restrained. However, Minister Chung was like a mad beast, crazily rushing towards Qin Yining. If this continued, if Qin Yining was injured, official Zhang would have to bear the consequences. Injuring Chung Yu was enough to make him badly battered. Minister Chung had a rough temperament, so it was easier to guess what he was thinking. If Qin Yining was injured, you would have to face Qin Huaiyuan, that wily old fox. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to live a good life for the rest of his life. Thinking of this, official Zhang hurriedly called for the soldiers to come in. He also started to persuade and pull the people from both sides apart. Minister Chung was sweating profusely from being surrounded by Jing Zhe and the other 3 bodyguards. He pointed at Qin Yining and angrily shouted, "You bastard! You ordered your servants to injure my son. I want you to pay with your life. If you know what's good for you, you'll die right now. That way, you'll be able to die a quick death and leave your corpse intact. Otherwise, I'll decapitate you." Minister Cheng's roar was like a large bell, shaking people's eardrums. Lian Xiaozhou was so scared that she hugged Bingtang with a pale face. Ji Yin stood in front of Qin Yining. Although she didn't show any fear, her face didn't look good. Qin Yining said with a calm expression, "Minister Chung loves his son dearly, but he can't accuse others indiscriminately. If it wasn't for young Master Chung charging towards my carriage and wanted to take my life, why would my guards stop him? Moreover, we're new here and don't know young Master Chung. I really don't know why young Master Chung wants to harm me." "Bullshit. Do you think my son is really going to charge here just because he said so? Clearly, It wasn't enough that you exiled that brat last time, and now you want to take revenge. Your family Qin people aren't good people. Your father is as cunning as a hornet's nest. You're also not a chaste woman. Now you still want to quibble? Dream on. Qin Yining said, Minister Chung, please be careful with your words. Not to mention that I didn't do anything wrong. I just suffered an undeserved calamity today. Even if I did something wrong, there are still Yamens in Dezhou's capital. Your Majesty is above the Yamens. Don't tell me that Dezhou's capital is a lawless place where you, Minister Chung, can casually mobilize troops and attempt to massacre people at will? You're twisting words and forcing logic. When it came to mobilizing troops, Minister Chung was speechless. Qin Yining said coldly, Who exactly is twisting words and forcing logic? I believe that your Majesty has his own judgment. Just a moment ago, I was wondering if I should go and beat the drum again and make another complaint to the Emperor. Now, it seems that there's no need. With Minister Chung privately mobilizing troops, I believe that your Majesty will soon pay attention to this matter and will certainly give us justice. What a glib tongue. You really are the daughter of Fox. You're a little fox, a fox spirit. Qin Yining looked at Minister Cheng's angry appearance. He was like a fighting cock. She didn't want to quarrel with such a person. She made things clear and didn't say anything else. On the side, the Yamens and Zhengdaren were shocked by Qin Yining's valiant performance. Only now did the Yamens remember. Today's matter, whether it was riding a horse on the street or getting off the carriage to confront the warden's office, Qin Yining's performance was calm and indifferent from beginning to end. It was as if nothing in the world could attract her attention. She didn't care, but she also had her own plans. For a woman to be able to remain calm in the face of a difficult situation, she was either too bold or too shrewd. Looking at her now, it seemed like she had both. For a moment, there was an awkward silence. After Minister Chung said those filthy words in a fit of rage, he thought back to his impulsive action of privately mobilizing troops and felt a burst of panic in his heart. His son was important, but his official position was also important. Without this black veil, without this official position, how could their family be protected? He still remembered what happened to the last person who privately mobilized troops. Even someone as powerful as Prince Zhongshuan, once he was accused of privately mobilizing troops, didn't he obediently give up his position as the commander of the Tiger Army to someone else? Zhengdaren looked at the quiet second-generation nobles and then looked at Minister Chung, who was deep in thought. He couldn't help but secretly let out a sigh of relief. He couldn't help but admire Qin Yining's methods. She actually used a few words that weren't pleasant to hear to calm the situation that was about to erupt into a fight and possibly even bloodshed. Although the situation wasn't chaotic, the confrontation between the two sides still continued. Just as Zhengdaren was thinking about what to do next, a rough voice suddenly came from outside. Chief Steward Li has arrived. When everyone heard this, their hearts jumped, and they all went out to greet him with different expressions. Head eunuch Li Guanwen wore a silver-gray eunuch uniform and held a rhino-handled horsetail whisk in his hand. When he saw everyone come out, he waved it heavily. With a sharp voice that belonged to the eunuchs, he said loudly, Your Majesty ordered this servant to ask Minister Chung a few questions. Minister Chung, please answer truthfully. Minister Chung hurriedly nodded. Naturally, I will tell you everything I know. When Li Guanwen heard this, he slightly nodded. Suddenly, his expression changed. He waved his horsetail whisk and asked, Minister Chung, you privately mobilized troops. Are you trying to rebel? When Minister Chung heard this, cold sweat dripped down his forehead. I don't dare. I'm terrified. Li Guanwen hurriedly pressed his forehead to the ground. The officials behind Minister Chung also panicked and said that they didn't dare to do it. Li Guanwen continued to sharply say, I already know about the horse riding in the street. I will definitely investigate it strictly. I won't wrongly accuse anyone, and I won't let anyone go. Is Minister Chung satisfied with my promise? Satisfied, of course satisfied. Thank you, Your Majesty, for sympathizing with this servant. Thank you, Your Majesty. Minister Chung hurriedly kowtowed. Li Guanwen's expression suddenly changed. From the sternness just now to the humility and gentleness that he used to treat people. He stepped forward to help Minister Chung get up and said gently, "Your Excellency, please don't be like this. His Majesty wants me to ask you, if you wake up and come back to your senses, please come with me to the palace and explain the matter clearly. It will be fine if you solve it clearly. You are an important official of the imperial court. Your Majesty still loves you very much. Your Majesty knows that you are anxious about your son's matter, so you acted so recklessly. Before coming here, he specially ordered the imperial hospital to arrange the best doctor to treat your son. This servant is ashamed. This servant thanks your Majesty." Minister Chung was so scared that his forehead was full of sweat. Li Guanwen's words just now couldn't be more clear. If he couldn't wake up and come back to his senses and still blindly show off his power, then he would most likely face the encirclement and suppression arranged by your Majesty. After all, this was an important place in the capital, under the emperor's feet. No emperor would allow someone in the capital to have the ability to mobilize the army for their own use. Minister Chung felt a burst of fear. His manic heart that was shocked by his son's accident also calmed down. However, when he thought about how his precious child, the only child of the Chung family, had knocked his head and was unconscious, he couldn't dispel his anger. He pointed at Qin Yining and said, "Head Steward Li, this matter is definitely related to the daughter of the family Qin family. This servant is going to the palace to explain the situation. Please arrest the daughter of the family Qin family and the bodyguards by her side." Li Guanwen glanced at Qin Yining. When he saw that Qin Yining didn't look angry and only stood there quietly with his hands by his side, he sighed in relief. Fortunately, this great aunt was sensible and quiet. If she also shouted here, it would be difficult for him, as an eunuch, to be sandwiched in the middle. After all, she was Qin Huaiyuan's precious child. "Young Miss Qin, today's matter is related to your bodyguards, right?" His Majesty's intention was for everyone involved to make a trip to the palace. "Which of your bodyguards did it? Let them come with me." Qin Yining frowned. He wished he could burn a hole in Minister Cheng's face with his stare. If it wasn't for this person's actions, how could it have attracted your Majesty's attention? She didn't want to hand him over. Because her status was low, it was easy for others to use her as a scapegoat. Qin Yining said, "What the people around me are doing is to protect me. Why don't I go with you, father-in-law?" I'm afraid it's not appropriate." "What's wrong with it? I'm the person involved. I saw it with my own eyes. If your Majesty asks, I can explain it clearly. But your Majesty didn't ask you to come to the palace. He only said to let the perpetrator enter the palace. Young Miss Qin, listen to this servant. It's not good for you to show your face in this matter." Jingzhe and the other three stood to the side and listened to Qin Yining and Li Guanwen's bargaining. Qin Yining refused to call them out and insisted on going to the palace to meet the emperor. Their hearts were filled with warmth. They felt that Qin Yining treated them as real people and gave them the greatest respect. He was never like their previous master, who treated them as dispensable tools. They were all hot-blooded men, so their hearts were moved. Since they followed Qin Yining, how could they put her in a difficult position because of this matter? After all, she was still an unmarried girl. Thinking of this, Jingzhe took a step forward and said to Li Guanwen, "I'm the one who killed the horse. I didn't hurt young Master Chung. He fell off the horse and fainted. If Master Steward doesn't mind, I'll go with you." Chapter 388. Jingzhe could feel Qin Yining's nervousness and worry. His heart felt warm. Although they were all in the business of risking their lives, in the Dian dynasty, the emperor had never considered their safety when he used them to do things. He only cared about whether or not they could complete the task. Now that they had met Qin Yining, they finally realized that there was a master who would consider their safety. Didn't you see how Qin Yining had volunteered to enter the palace for his own safety? These people were used to being spies. Even though they had become imperial bodyguards, they still couldn't help but pay attention to the happenings in the imperial court. They knew how difficult Qin Huaiyuan's current situation was. Qin Yining was willing to step forward to protect them. If Jingzhi didn't step forward to admit his wrongdoings, would their young miss have to take the blame? At that time, wouldn't her reputation be even more irreparable? Thinking of this, Jingzhi made up his mind. His heart surged with pride. Even if he was going to be beheaded, he wouldn't regret protecting his master today. Jingzhi thought of many things, but in reality, it only took a few breaths. When Qin Yining saw that he was only silent, he couldn't help but become more anxious. He insisted, "Head stewardly, today's matter has its own conclusion. Jingzhi is a bodyguard I hired with money. What's wrong with him loyally protecting his master when danger suddenly arose? Furthermore, he didn't hurt anyone. The one he killed was a horse. If your majesty had ordered for the people involved in this matter to enter the palace, I would have been the one to enter the palace to explain the situation." Although Li Guanwen was a bit embarrassed by Qin Yining's words, he still admired her for her loyalty. However, in her heart, she admired her loyalty and secretly envied Jingzhi for having such a master who was willing to protect her servants. Not only Li Guanwen, but the people who followed Qin Yining all felt the same way. Even the second-generation masters, who had been clamoring for a long time, quieted down at this moment. Li Guanwen cleared his throat and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Qin. This is your majesty's order. I can't go against it." He then instructed his men to bring Jingzhi along. After bidding farewell to Lord Zheng, he left with Minister Cheng. Qin Yining walked him out of the door before returning with a worried frown. Seeing that the situation had eased, Lord Zheng heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. "Miss Qin, today's matter is almost settled. You can go back now." Before Qin Yining could reply, the other rich second generation shouted, "Why should she go first? We are the victims, so we should be the ones to leave first." At this moment, the soldiers brought by the Minister of War had already retreated. The warden's office of the 5 cities was once again safe. Furthermore, your majesty had already intervened in this matter. Lord Zheng knew that he could only make the same choice as before and firmly stand by your majesty's side in the future. Qin Huaiyuan was a mainstay of your majesty's faction. Naturally, he had to protect Qin Yining. Moreover, she was a girl. Thinking of this, Lord Zheng's expression darkened. Today's matter is already very clear. You all rode your horses first. There were countless witnesses. Do you still want to deny it? Miss Qin was in the carriage from beginning to end and never showed her face. If Miss Qin's servants were in the wrong, then Chief Steward Li had already taken them away just now. You people can't escape even if you rode your horses. Do you still want to deny it? Seeing that Lord Zheng had suddenly become unyielding, the second-generation masters were somewhat flustered. Qin Yining glanced at Lord Zheng and naturally understood the reason for his sudden change in attitude. He smiled and said, "Many thanks, Lord Zheng. However, how can I be at ease now that my people have been brought into the palace? I believe that no matter what the result is, your Yamen will definitely receive the news first. I hope that Lord Zheng will allow me to wait here with my people." When Lord Zheng heard this, he didn't feel that her request was overstepping his bounds. Qin Yining's attitude was very sincere, and she was wholeheartedly protecting her servants. Whether it was her etiquette or her intentions, they were all very admirable. Thus, Lord Zheng didn't object. He smiled and said, "I'm just afraid that Miss Qin won't be used to it because this place is too crude." "Of course not. Lord Zheng is too polite." The two exchanged a few pleasantries before Qin Yining returned to his seat. The second-generation masters looked at each other in dismay. They thought to themselves that when Minister Cheng enters the palace and meets the emperor, they'll see how your family Qin people die. As a result, the group of people chatted with great confidence and even casually asked for tea and snacks. Seeing that this group of people didn't have any self-awareness, Lord Zheng was a bit annoyed. However, because of their status, he didn't want to offend them. He could only order people to prepare tea and snacks. This wait lasted until the afternoon. There wasn't any news from the palace. Instead, the fathers of these second-generation masters personally came and dragged Lord Zheng out to plead with him, hoping that he could bring them back. Lord Zheng's head was already hurting from all the noise from these second-generation masters. Thus, he went with the flow and agreed to their requests. However, he requested that these people couldn't leave the capital at will. They had to be at his beck and call. As a result, Lord Zheng received a lot of gratitude. Qin Yining watched as the court officials smiled and spoke to Lord Zheng. Then, as soon as they entered the room, their expressions immediately changed. Those with calm temperaments would tell them to leave with a sullen expression. Those with bad tempers would beat up their sons on the spot and take them away while cursing. Some of them had a very distant and disdainful attitude when they entered the room. There were also some who greeted her politely. Qin Yining secretly noted down these people's behavior. She could analyze who was on the side of the emperor and who was on the other side. As for those second-generation masters who were taken away by their fathers and grandfathers, Qin Yining could already guess that they would be punished when they returned home. After all, the situation in the imperial court was very tense. As court officials, they had to stand on the right side in order to have a good future. These fathers had schemed and chosen either the side of the emperor or the side of the old officials and aristocratic families. However, no matter what choice they made, it was the result of careful consideration. Unexpectedly, before the situation had matured, their choice of sides and arrangements had been broken by the son of the Bai family. Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. Her gloomy mood had finally been amused by these people. Qin Yining had Bing Tang take Lin Xiaozhou home first. Go back and explain to old madam and mother. There's no need to be too detailed. Just say that I have some matters to attend to at the yamen, and I'm not sure when I'll be back. Ask them not to worry. If mother asks about the details, be careful not to say too much. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the guards at home won't be able to do anything in front of mother in the future. Qin Yining knew her mother's temperament very well. She was afraid that the Sun clan would be eager to protect their daughter and would make things difficult for the secret agents and Xiao Yuqing who stayed at home. Bing Tang also knew that Qin Yining had important matters to attend to and that it would be inconvenient to take her and Lin Xiaozhou with him. Thus, she nodded and left first. Qin Yining was left with Ji Yun, young man, and the other two to accompany him. While waiting, Zheng Darren didn't neglect and ordered people to send food and drinks. It was already past Su, but there was no news from the palace. Qin Yining also didn't have any intention of leaving. He even specially prepared a guest room for Qin Yining for her to stay for the night. Qin Yining was worried about how the palace would deal with her, so how could she sleep? She thanked Zheng Darren, but still waited in the same place. Zheng Darren admired this young woman's loyalty even more. He didn't force her and just let Qin Yining do as she wished. As for young man and the other two, they were now even more loyal to Qin Yining than before. It could be said that in the past, they were tied together by benefits and money, and they were forced to serve as bodyguards. But now, they weren't tied together by money, but by their feelings. As bodyguards, wasn't it the same no matter who they worked for? To be able to meet a master who treated them as human beings and cared about their safety was their fortune. Qin Yining waited there for the whole night. During this time, she was extremely tired, but she just closed her eyes and took a short nap. Just like that, when the sun was high in the sky the next day, news finally came from the palace. Zheng Darren entered with a smile and cupped his hands, saying, "Congratulations, congratulations. Your Majesty has made a wise decision. This matter has nothing to do with Miss Qin. It was a servant who offended his superiors and injured Minister Cheng's son. Your Majesty will only punish that bodyguard of yours to be beheaded and won't pursue the rest. He also won't allow Minister Cheng to pursue the matter. Miss Qin, you are safe now." With every sentence that Zheng Darren said, Qin Yining's heart became colder. In the end, she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Jingzhe was going to be beheaded. Fatuous ruler. Fatuous ruler. Qin Yining was roaring in her heart. But on the surface, she tried her best to restrain herself from saying anything unpleasant. Instead, she forced herself to calm down and asked, "Zheng Darren, you said that my bodyguard was sentenced to be beheaded by your Majesty?" "That's right. He's just a servant. Miss, you don't have to take it to heart." Mr. Zheng admired Qin Yining's loyalty, so he didn't mind saying, "The current situation is the result of the balance between all the forces. It's a good thing for Miss Qin's father to keep the balance by losing only one servant. Qin Yining obviously knew that Zheng Daren's words were correct, but how could she swallow this anger? How could she tolerate the fact that her own stability was built on someone else's sacrifice? She knew that people were divided into different classes, high and low, but her experience growing up made her never look down on any servants. Servants were also people, and they were also born and raised by their parents. How could her life be more precious than other people's? Qin Yining had stayed up all night, so her face was deathly pale and her eyes were dark. Coupled with the thunderbolt from the blue, her vision darkened even more. For a moment, her mind was in a mess. She wanted to save Jingzhe, but she couldn't think of a way. Just as Zheng Daren was asking with concern, someone came in and said, "Reporting to your majesty, Minister Qin from the Ministry of Rights is here. Quickly invite him in." Zheng Daren immediately went out to welcome him. Qin Huaiyuan was still wearing his official robes from yesterday's morning court. He looked very tired, and it seemed that he didn't sleep well either. Qin Yining bowed to Qin Huaiyuan. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, "Sister Yi, come back with your father." Qin Yining's lips trembled. Just as she was about to speak, Qin Huaiyuan said, "You've been out all night, so you should go back and rest." Then he turned to Zheng Daren and said, "Brother Zheng, I'm sorry for disturbing you. I'll have to trouble you to take care of my daughter. Don't mention it. We're all on the same side." Zheng Daren smiled politely. Chapter 389. The atmosphere in the carriage was very gloomy. Qin Yining hadn't slept all night, and the news that Jingzhe was going to be executed had given her a splitting headache. Her complexion was also very bad. She leaned against the wooden wall of the carriage and closed her eyes to rest, her fingers pinching the space between her eyebrows. Qin Huaiyuan said, "Father thought you had already returned home. I didn't expect you to be guarding the warden's office in the 5 cities. I only just found out that you were here when your mother was very worried. It's my fault for making father worry." Qin Yining opened her eyes, which were already bloodshot. "Father didn't return home last night? Were you in front of your majesty the entire time?" "Yes." Qin Huaiyuan's face was also full of fatigue. He said, "Yesterday, when Minister Cheng brought people into the palace, I happened to be there." Qin Yining smiled bitterly and said, "Father, I know even if you don't say it. It must have been a battle of words. It's my fault for causing so much trouble for father." Qin Huaiyuan heard this and smiled. He said, "How can it be considered your fault? You were also an innocent bystander. In the end, it all started because I was startled by their caravan that day. I didn't want to give in, and I also didn't want to let these rich second generations run amok in the capital and disturb the people. That's why I pursued them so fiercely. I didn't expect that it would cause such trouble." Qin Yining said, "Father, I'm not afraid of trouble, but is Jingzhe really beyond saving?" Qin Huaiyuan sighed and nodded. He said, "Sister Yi, you're a smart person. Father doesn't need to tell you that your majesty made the decision to punish Jingzhe just to shut Minister Cheng's mouth with a servant. In this matter, we only lost one person, and we can maintain the balance we've worked so hard to maintain. We didn't lose anything. The one who lost was Minister Cheng. But there's still a life involved." Qin Yining's voice was somewhat hoarse. Qin Huaiyuan said, "Father knows what you're thinking, and I know you're sincere. But the imperial edict has already been issued. What else can we do? Sister Yi, I know you're smart, and you might be able to think of a way to save Jingzhe's life, but you have to remember that you're the daughter of a family Qin. You have to think twice before you act." Qin Huaiyuan's intention was quite clear. Jingzhe was just a servant. If necessary, it was not a big deal to sacrifice a servant. The family Qin had not yet gained a firm foothold in the capital. What they needed was your majesty's protection. Your majesty had already sentenced Jingzhe to be beheaded, so it was already set in stone. If they dared to plead for leniency, it would be tantamount to slapping the emperor's face. From a bystander's point of view, Qin Yining knew that he shouldn't have interfered and made things worse. However, the reason Jingzhe intervened was to protect her. If it weren't for her, How could he have implicated Jingzhe and caused him to lose his life? After all, Jingzhe was someone by her side. If something happened to him, she would just shrink her neck and not do anything. How could she convince the public in the future? Moreover, she didn't want Jingzhe to be sacrificed in order to protect her. Thinking of this, Qin Yining said, "Father, I promise I won't harm the interests of the family." She was telling Qin Huaiyuan that she was determined to save Jingzhe. Qin Yining looked at Qin Huaiyuan with apprehension. She was thinking about what she would do if her father denied her decision, or even severely reprimanded or stopped her. Unexpectedly, Qin Huaiyuan suddenly burst out laughing, scaring Qin Yining. "Father, I knew it. You were stubborn. Just like when I was young. Once I decided on something, I would do it according to my own ideas. I didn't care whether others would stop me or not." Qin Yining smiled when she heard this. "Father, you are such a rational and steady person. How could you be like this? You're not lying to me, are you?" "I'm not lying to you. Don't all people start off as rash and high-spirited? They gradually settle down and become steady?" Qin Huaiyuan took off his official hat and rubbed his face. "Sister Yi, you could do whatever you want. However, you must remember what I said just now. Don't forget that you are a member of the family Qin. The first thing you need to do is to protect the family. Only when the family is strong will you have more confidence in the future." "I will remember what you said, Father," Qin Yining said gratefully. "Thank you for your understanding." Qin Huaiyuan only smiled and patted Qin Yining's head. When the carriage returned home, Qin Yining went to see the Sun Clan and said that she was going back to catch up on sleep. However, the servants could see that Qin Yining's expression was not good, especially the people around Qin Yining who knew what was going on. Qin Yining sat cross-legged on the heated Kong bed next to the window. Although she was tired and sleepy, she did not feel sleepy at all because of Jingzhe. Jingzhe's execution was personally judged by Li Qitian. Since they could not plead for mercy, they could only think of a way to make Li Qitian speak up and pardon Jingzhe's death sentence. However, Li Qitian was fine, so why should she release Jingzhe? In Li Qitian's opinion, letting the family Qin lose one servant was enough to let Minister Cheng's family suffer a loss. This was already biased towards the family Qin. If they were not careful, it was very likely that they would anger Li Qitian, and the consequences would be unimaginable. Qin Yining pinched the space between her eyebrows with her fingers and sat on the heated Kong bed next to the window, without saying a word, thinking of a way. Ji Yun and the others saw that Qin Yining was unwilling to rest. After persuading her to no avail, they could only quietly accompany her. Qin Yining did not touch the lunch that was brought over. It was the same for dinner. She did not eat or sleep, which made Ji Yun, Xian Yun, and the others very anxious. Young Man, Xiao Shui, and Han were also particularly moved. Qin Yining had already done her best in this matter. Jingzhe was implicated, but it had nothing to do with Qin Yining. Although they felt sorry for their brother, they would not take their anger out on Qin Yining. Bing Tang and Ji Yun were so anxious by Qin Yining that they almost went to tell Qin Huaiyuan. Qin Yining suddenly got off the bed and ordered, "Go and call Young Man and the others over. I have something to tell them. Also, Ji Yun, go to Master Zhong and tell him that I want to use our people in Dian to secretly make a trip here." Seeing that Qin Yining's eyes were clear and she was in high spirits, without any signs of depression, they guessed that she had already thought of a way. Qin Yining saw that Ji Yun, Bing Tang, and the others were looking at her eagerly. She could not help but laugh and say, "I have thought of a way. It should work. You guys quickly do as I say." Yes. Everyone hurriedly split up. Qin Yining called Young Man and the others over and whispered a few words to them. They looked at each other in confusion, nodded, and did as Qin Yining said. Chapter 390. When Qin Yining saw Zhong Dezhong, she immediately asked Master Zhong to send a secret letter to the capital of Dian and hand it over to a trustworthy person in the capital. As for the contents of the letter, she leaned close to Master Zhong and whispered a few words into his ear. Master Zhong was stunned when he heard what she said and said, "Boss, what you're doing could lead to a fatal disaster. You don't know where the Zhou's people are. Qin Yining raised her hand slightly and stopped Master Zhong from finishing his words. She smiled at him and comforted him. Manager, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. You just need to do as I say. Just use the carrier pigeon. The sooner the better. Master Zhong was a bit worried at first, but when he saw how confident Qin Yining was, he no longer hesitated. He nodded solemnly and said, Don't worry. I'll get it done as soon as possible. Then I'll have to trouble you. There are people's lives tied to this matter. You must be careful. Yes. Qin Yining didn't delay Master Zhong. After she finished speaking, she got out of the carriage. Master Zhong immediately ordered someone to whip the horse and drive the carriage away from the family Qin. Qin Yining brought the maidservant back to her room. When she arrived at the door, she saw Chao Yuqing standing there with her hands behind her back. She was frowning as she waited for her. It seemed like she didn't come with good intentions. Qin Yining already knew that she would come. She smiled and said, You're here. Come in and have a cup of tea. Okay. Chao Yuqing admired her calmness. In addition, her face was similar to Qin Huaiyuan's when he was young. The depression in her heart dissipated when she saw Qin Yining. The two of them entered the room and sat down on the embroidered stool next to the square table. A few people from Bingtang came to serve tea and refreshments before leaving. Chao Yuqing was a straightforward person. She immediately went straight to the point and said, Why did you make all the spies remember such a ridiculous thing? That's not true at all. Of course I know that's not true. Qin Yining smiled and said, These are just things that I made up at the last minute to save Jingzhe and their lives. Madam Chao, don't tell me you don't know what's at stake here. I heard that your majesty has sent a group of people to the Dian dynasty to search for the treasures left behind by the Dian emperor. Chao Yuqing furrowed her brows and said, There is indeed such a thing. That batch of treasures is not a small amount. Dezhou's treasury is currently empty, and we are in need of money. Your majesty naturally cares about this money. But what does this have to do with the spies? You should know that your majesty will think of something in a moment of desperation if he can't find the location of the treasure, right? Chao Yuqing fell into deep thought. That's right. If he can't find the money, Li Qiqian will naturally ask the people closest to the Emperor Emeritus. The Yuqi Yin is currently in the capital and is under your majesty's control. Perhaps he has already investigated everything clearly. Naturally, he won't be able to find the whereabouts of the treasure. The existence of the Silver Mask spies is no secret at all. Since Qin Huaiyuan had recruited these spies, he had never hidden anything from them. If Li Qiqian becomes anxious, he will naturally ask the spies. The Silver Mask spies were a team that she had single-handedly brought up. Naturally, she had a certain degree of affection for them. Naturally, she didn't want them to lose their lives because of the actions of the fatuous emperor. Thinking of this, Chao Yuqing said, But will you be able to protect Jingzhe by doing this? Don't worry. Qin Yining smiled confidently. Not only will I protect Jingzhe, but I will also prevent future troubles for the spies. How many Silver Mask spies are currently in the capital? Including Jingzhe, there are 16 of them. The rest are arranged to work outside. However, this batch of spies is the last batch that I've taught. If there are any more casualties, there won't be anyone left to replace them. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. No matter how big the world is, human lives are the most important. Originally, this method wasn't a good thing to begin with. Isn't it good to keep them alive? When Chao Yuqing heard this, she lowered her long eyelashes, somewhat moved. Do you have absolute confidence in this matter? I'm 90% certain, except for some irresistible factors. Qin Yining made a conservative estimate. Chao Yuqing thought for a moment, then smiled and said, All right, I understand. Don't worry. We spies have also been specially trained to interrogate by torture. Once we capture them, we definitely won't divulge any information about the main family to anyone else. This isn't a problem for us. I'll give the orders right away. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. Thank you for your trouble. You're welcome. If you can really save their lives, I'll have to thank you. Chao Yuqing patted Qin Yining's shoulder and quickly walked out. Qin Yining's heart was in suspense. Every day, he arranged for people to inquire about Jingzhe's whereabouts. 6 days passed like this. Li Qiqian, who was in the imperial study, received an urgent letter from the old capital of Dian. After reading it, Li Qiqian immediately slapped the imperial desk and stood up. I've worn out iron shoes, but still couldn't find it. Quick, Li Guanwen, immediately go to the family Qin. Bring Qin Ming and his daughter's bodyguards into the palace. Oh, right. Also call that woman surnamed Chao, the one who used to be Qin Ming's concubine. Bring her here as well. Hurry up, hurry up. Yes, yes, yes. This servant will go right away. Under Li Qiqian's urging, Li Guanwen tripped and almost fell to the ground. He staggered out of the room. Li Qiqian looked at the urgent letter in his hand again. His eyes were filled with pleasant surprise and joy. The contents of the letter were very clear. There was a rumor in the old capital of Dian that the silver-masked secret agents by the Dian Emperor Emeritus' side were the Emperor Emeritus's most intimate weapons. These people might know the whereabouts of the treasure. And weren't these silver-masked secret agents currently in the family Qin? It seemed that Qin Huaiyuan was truly his lucky star. Li Qiqian happily paced back and forth. He was constantly thinking about how to ask the silver-masked secret agents and how to deal with these people. While Qin Yining was helping Lin Xiaozhou with her needlework, the little girl's anxious voice came from outside. Miss, people from the palace are here. They want to take away our family's bodyguards. The needle in Qin Yining's hand almost pricked her finger. She hurriedly stood up and quickly walked out. It was currently afternoon, and Qin Huaiyuan was also at home. He was talking with Li Guanwen in the front courtyard. Li Guanwen was anxious, but he said politely, Minister Qin, you don't need to be nervous. Your Majesty just wants to ask you and Miss Qin's bodyguards a few questions. Qin Huaiyuan's heart was full of questions, but he just nodded calmly. Since Your Majesty has something to ask, of course he will. Servants. Qin Huaiyuan ordered people to come. Li Guanwen hurriedly added, That's right. Your Majesty also specifically said that he wants to see your family's Madame Chao. Qin Huaiyuan's heart tightened again. He could already guess what Your Majesty wanted to do. He still smiled gently and nodded. He also ordered people to call Chao Yuqing over. Chapter 391. Qin Yining worriedly watched his father and his entourage leave. Although she had already sketched out this plan countless times in her heart and considered several possible accidents at every step, when a matter was truly placed in front of her, she was still worried about their safety. Qin Yining returned to his room and waited quietly. However, when Qin Huaiyuan, Chao Yuqing, and the rest of the family Qin guard were taken away, it still caused panic in the family. It was because the family Qin had experienced too many accidents. The family had long realized that their current situation was not a comfortable living environment. In this position, there were too many dangerous factors that needed to be solved. Old Madam lit her tobacco pipe, but she didn't smoke. She just held it in her hand and stared blankly at the small courtyard overflowing with spring outside the window. Mammy Qin persuaded in a low voice, Old Madam, don't worry. Laoi is such a smart person. This servant thinks that there is nothing that Laoi can't do. This time, Your Majesty might have an important task for Laoi to do. There is indeed this possibility. Old Madam felt much better after hearing this. The Sun Clan and Second Madam also nodded. Look at how polite Chief Steward Li was to our family's Laoi just now in the palace. He even had a bit of flattery. Thinking about it, it shouldn't be a big problem. With this explanation, everyone felt much more relieved. Everyone began to guess why Li Qiqian wanted to see Chao Yuqing. Could it be because of Chao Shi's beauty? Han's second young mistress held her belly that was about to give birth and couldn't help but frown and guess. After all, Chao Yuqing was a very beautiful woman. Without looking at her face, just her flirtatious and charming body made them feel weak in the bones and ashamed of their inferiority. Li Qiqian, as the emperor, had the world. It was normal for him to like beautiful women. Everyone agreed with this guess in their hearts. However, the members of the Sun Clan were a little worried. We haven't figured out Your Majesty's temper yet. It's unpredictable. I think Madame Chao is now well behaved. It's not like our family can't afford to raise a bodyguard. If she enters the palace, Who knows what kind of life she will have? What are you talking about? You're really short-sighted. Old Madam snorted coldly. Once she enters the palace, she will be the master, the person beside your majesty. If our family can have such a person, won't our riches and honor be overflowing in the future? But this might not be the only good home in the world. You're quite the busybody. In the room, Old Madam and the Sun clan started to quarrel again. Second Madam and Han, second young mistress, were persuading her from the side. But Qin Yining didn't care about the trivial things that the women in the family were worried about. However, she was also glad that these people did not know the inside story, and there were very few people like her who placed their hearts on the fire. Qin Yining didn't sleep for the entire night. Ji Yun, Xian Yun, Bing Tang, and Xiu Lu all stayed in the room to accompany Qin Yining for the entire night. Although they didn't understand the inside story, seeing that Qin Yining was so worried that she couldn't sleep, they also felt distressed. It's only been 6 to 7 days, and the bit of meat that was hard to gain has become thin again. When Wang Yi sees this later, won't his heart ache to death? Bing Tang helplessly brought a bowl of warm red bean porridge to Qin Yining. You should think more about yourself. You're racking your brains. Do you not want your body anymore? Qin Yining pursed her lips and shook her head. Don't worry about it. My body is very good. How was this servant worrying about it? How many times have I nursed Mrs. Body? Ever since you suffered that injury and lost a lot of blood, you haven't been able to recover your bones. After that, there was a famine, followed by a migration. When we arrived into Zhou, we were calculating every day. Let me tell you, if this continues, no matter how good your body is, it will collapse. Qin Yining was scared by Bing Tang's nagging. She could only pick up the bowl of porridge and eat a few mouthfuls. Bing Tang then said, even if you don't do it for yourself, you have to do it for Wang Yi. In order to marry you, Wang Yi sent away all the women by his side. He was afraid that you would be bullied, so he also sent away that unsociable old woman. Wang Yi doesn't have any other women by his side, but he is counting on you to give birth to Wang Ye's children. If you don't nurture your body properly, what will you do in the future? Qin Yining almost spat out the porridge in her mouth when she heard what she said. She pointed a finger at her forehead and said, you bad wench. Then she thought for a while and said, to be honest, we should all nurture our bodies properly. You are all grown up and have reached the age to be compatible with others. Xian Yun and Ji Yun both had an as expected expression. I knew you would drag us down with you. They chatted and laughed, which made Qin Yining's depression dissipate a lot. As they were talking, an old woman suddenly shouted from outside, Master is back. Qin Yining jumped up immediately, threw down the bowl, and looked outside. Qin Huaiyuan walked in front, followed by Chao Yuqing. Behind Chao Yuqing was a group of secret agents. Qin Yining counted them one by one, and her gaze fell on Jingzhe, Xiao Shui, young man, and Han, who were the last to enter the door. Qin Yining finally smiled in relief. It's done. Miss. Jingzhe, Xiao Shui, young man, and Han strode forward and knelt on the spot to salute Qin Yining. Jingzhe even kowtowed and said, thank you for saving our lives, miss. Dispense with the formalities. Get up quickly. Have you been tortured? Let the doctor take a look at you later. Jingzhe quickly shook his head and knelt on the ground, refusing to get up. He looked up at Qin Yining and said, Miss, you are unparalleled in wisdom. Your Majesty did not make things difficult for us. At this time, the rest of the secret agents also saluted Qin Yining respectfully and thanked her in unison. Thank you, miss. Qin Yining's plan could not prevent them from being suspected and investigated, but could save their lives. Qin Yining sent a messenger pigeon that day to the old Dayan capital in the south, saying that only the Silver Mask secret agents knew about the treasures of the Dayan Emperor. After Qin Yining and Chao Yuqing had a discussion, they taught them another lie. He said that when they were brought to the secret chamber by the retired emperor, each of them was hypnotized by a master, and a message was stored in their minds. Only when a specific secret signal was released could they recall the content of the message, and each of them had a different memory. There were a total of 24 Silver Mask secret agents, and there were only 16 of them in the capital. Even if Li Qiqian wanted to torture them, It was impossible. Because as soon as there was a movement in the capital, the 8 of them who had not returned yet might not return. Then, even if they tortured them, the information would not be complete. How would they find the whereabouts of the treasure? In this way, Your Majesty would not only not kill Jingzhe, but also the rest of the silver-masked secret agents. Your Majesty must ensure their safety in order to find the treasure. Chapter 392. Seeing that the secret agents loved and respected Qin Yining so much, Qin Huaiyuan couldn't help but smile as he stood in the corridor with his hands behind his back. He didn't blame Qin Yining for handling this matter without discussing it with him. Instead, he felt that his daughter's wisdom was becoming more and more mature. Such a method of killing 2 birds with 1 stone wasn't something that anyone could think of. Chao Yuqing stood beside Qin Huaiyuan and looked at his smiling profile. She couldn't help but smile as well. 4th Miss has surpassed her master. Darren will have a successor in the future. That's right. Qin Huaiyuan nodded slightly. Although he regretted that he didn't have a son, now that things were like this, what was there to force? Besides, his daughter had the appearance, talent, and was resourceful. She was loyal and righteous, and she had a keen sense for court affairs. Every time she pointed out the problems of the current situation, his eyes lit up. Such a clever and sensible daughter was simply 18 streets ahead of those second generations who rode horses on the streets. What was so great about giving birth to that kind of son? If they had the ability, it would be great if they could also raise a smart and beautiful daughter. Qin Huaiyuan couldn't help but laugh heartily. He walked towards the old madam and the others who had already come out to welcome them. Old madam, look, I told you that first master would be fine. Your Majesty has placed first master in such an important position. Second madam held the old madam's arm and joined in the fun. The old madam beamed with smiles and nodded repeatedly. She pulled Qin Huaiyuan's arm and said, "Next time Your Majesty asks you to do something, remember to send a message home. Don't make Mother worry for nothing." "I know, Mother." Qin Huaiyuan smiled and comforted her. "Now that we have a firm foothold, it's fine as long as we live our days in peace. There's no need to worry too much in the future." "Really?" The old madam grabbed Qin Huaiyuan's arm in surprise. Qin Huaiyuan saw his old mother like this and felt a bit sad in his heart. He said with a smile, "Of course it's true. As long as we live our days in peace and don't cause trouble, it's fine." That's good. Old madam smiled and nodded repeatedly. She turned around and instructed Mammy Qin to ask someone to prepare the meal. Qin Yining had a reunion dinner with his family, washed up, and fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. In the middle of the night, Ji Yun, who was sleeping, heard a noise from the back window. She woke up with a start and looked back, only to see Pang Xiao coming out from the corner door of the washroom behind the bed. Ji Yun could not help but laugh in her heart. Counting the days, "Wang, you should be here in the next few days." He smiled and bowed. Then, he quietly opened the door and left. Pang Xiao sat on the edge of Qin Yining's bed and looked at the sleeping Qin Yining with the dim light left by Ji Yun. She was lying on her side. Her white cheeks were pressed against the pillow whose exact color could not be seen under the candlelight. Her lips were slightly open, revealing 2 slightly large front teeth. Her long hair was scattered on the pillow, making her palm-sized face look even smaller. The shadows cast by her long eyelashes were like 2 small fans. Pang Xiao gently rubbed her cheeks with his index finger. Qin Yining dodged in a daze and muttered with a frown. Pang Xiao could not help but chuckle. He could not help but lean over and kiss her on the cheek. After exhausting her mind for several days, Qin Yining had been in a state of high exhaustion. If it had been any other day, she would have woken up long ago. However, today, she showed no signs of waking up. She was still in a deep sleep with a frown. Pang Xiao did not wake her up. He just sat on the side and looked at her quietly. His fingers twirled a strand of her long hair and played with it. When he was tired of sitting, he lay on the edge of her bed for a while. It was not until late at night that he kissed her lips again. He whispered softly, "I'm leaving. I'll come to see you next time." What answered him was Qin Yining's regular breathing as she slept. Pang Xiao chuckled and left through the window. The next morning, When Qin Yining got up to wash up, she found that there were several crooked braids on her head. She was covering her mouth and yawning when she met Ji Yun's teasing gaze. "What's wrong?" Qin Yining took the salt and brushed her teeth. Ji Yun took a handkerchief and prepared it at the side. She whispered, "The braids on your head are all Wang Ye's masterpieces." Qin Yining was shocked. She muttered, "What? You were in a deep sleep last night. Wang Yi did not wake you up when he came. He just sat by the side and watched you sleep. Perhaps he was bored, so he played with your hair. I didn't expect you to not react even after I braided several braids for you." Qin Yining didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "Why didn't you wake me up? When Wang Yi came, this servant naturally had to withdraw. You should go back and ask Wang Yi why he didn't wake you up." Qin Yining was so embarrassed that her face turned red. She rolled her eyes at Ji Yun and whispered, "You must have learned bad things from Bing Tang. Your words are becoming more and more vicious." Ji Yun saw that Qin Yining was so embarrassed and laughed even more happily. With all the troubles resolved, Qin Yining was in a good mood. She wanted to find time to discuss business matters with Master Zhou, who knew that just as she finished changing her clothes, someone outside shouted, "Fourth young lady, first madam wants you to quickly go to the front hall." Qin Yining was stunned. She straightened the jade hairpin on her head and pushed the door open. She said, "Why is my mother looking for me?" Replying to young lady, "Just now, a mama came from the palace to pass on the Empress Dowager's order. She said that she wants to see First Madam." Qin Yining immediately became nervous. The person who passed on the message didn't open the door, so she didn't know about it. She anxiously quickened her pace, afraid that her mother would be wronged. When she arrived at the front hall, she saw the Sun clan talking with a mama who was about 40 years old and wearing the clothes of a female official. Seeing Qin Yining enter, the mama stood up and saluted. "Greetings to young Lady Qin. This servant's surname is Chun, and I serve the Empress Dowager. Today, the Empress Dowager has invited Madam Qin and young lady to the palace for a gathering." Qin Yining was very puzzled when she heard this, but she still had a flattered expression on her face. "The Empress Dowager has summoned us. We weren't prepared for this, and were really afraid that we would offend the Empress Dowager." Mama Chen smiled and said, "Young Lady Qin is joking. The Empress Dowager knows that Lord Qin is Your Majesty's right-hand man and has been looking for an opportunity to meet you and Madam. Today, it just so happens that all the womenfolk are coming to the palace to pay their respects. The Empress Dowager has ordered this servant to come pick you and Madam Qin up. You and Madam really don't need to be nervous." It would be a lie to say that they weren't nervous. The Sun clan was so nervous that their palms were sweating. She wanted to say that Qin Huayuan was in the morning court, and they had to wait for Qin Huayuan to return home before making a decision. However, these thoughts were just thoughts. After all, she also knew that it wasn't appropriate to say these words. Qin Yining calmed down. No matter what the Empress Dowager wanted to do, she wouldn't take their lives. As long as they didn't lose their lives, nothing else could be considered a big deal. "Then, I'll have to trouble Mama Chen. Don't mention it." Seeing Qin Yining so happy, Mama Chen smiled and said, "The carriage has already been prepared. The Empress Dowager specifically ordered me to pick up Madam and young lady. Will you two come with this servant?" You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.